Much. And are there any items of new business inquiries or other matters? I have Councillor Boyle on the queue.
Thanks. So I'm hoping to just read into the record a statement about a beloved Vancouver resident who passed away last week. Just to say, this past week, we lost a citizen deeply committed to peace, justice, and equality, a largely unsung but instrumental figure in the American civil rights movement, the labor movement, and the anti-nuclear movement, who called Vancouver home for nearly 3 decades. On October 31st, Hunter Pitts O'Dell, better known as Jack O'Dell, died in palliative care at VGH at the age of 96. In the 1940s, as a young merchant marine, O'Dell joined the anti-segregationist National Marine Union, later was a member of the Communist Party of Canada at the height of the McCarthy witch hunt, and left the party at the end of the 1950s in order to work with Dr. Martin Luther King in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and became one of Dr. King's closest allies. Jack O'Dell was a mentor to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and was one of 5 organizers of a 1 million person march against nuclear weapons in New York. In the 1990s, Jack moved to Kitsilano with his wife, Jane Power, where they have both continued to be committed to progressive causes and campaigns. I was deeply privileged to have called Jack a parishioner when I was a United Church minister, and in his Vancouver years, he continued his role as a teacher and mentor for many from all walks of life. He was a guiding light for Vancouver scholars of African American history, such as Drs. Karen Ferguson of SFU and Ian Roxborough Smith of the University of the Fraser Valley. He was also an instrumental figure in the life of Vancouver writer and comedian Charlie Demers, and the subject of a documentary screened at Doxa recently by local filmmaker Rami Katz, featuring the voice of local singer Dawn Pemberton. Last year, O'Dell also met with members of Black Lives Matter Vancouver to celebrate the continued battle for equality. So thank you for that time. Today, we remember Jack O'Dell as a citizen of our city who left it far richer for his time in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Councillor Fry.
Wow. Well, that's also on a sad note, and unfortunately I hadn't prepared quite as extensive and really a beautiful eulogy. I do want to note the passing of Tom Durning, who Tom was a real leader in the city and an advocate for renters. He was also a Habs fan, but you can't be perfect, right? Mm-hmm. But Tom offered a great deal of insight and mentorship to me over the years, and I really appreciate him for all he did for me and for this city and for so many renters who benefited from Tom's exceptional work with the Tenant Resource Action Center. And there will be a service for Tom on Thursday.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thank you very much. 2 brief points. I did want to note, because Council won't be meeting until later in November, that we are less than a week away from Remembrance Day, and just encourage all the citizens of Vancouver to honor our veterans, because there are a number of wonderful celebrations throughout the city, ranging from Victory Square to the Chinatown Service, National Aboriginal Veterans Memorial, Park South, and the Japanese ceremony in Stanley Park. And I think it's really important that everybody support and honor our veterans. So I hope everybody will have a chance to do that. And I also wanted to note and send a shout out to our media who cover our council meetings, because the Jack Webster Awards are happening on Thursday evening. And they really are an important part of getting the word out to the public. And so I assume that if we do have a council reserve on Thursday night, they won't be here because they will be covering and celebrating it. But they all can sit here for long hours with us and help us to convey things to the public. So I wanted to thank them for their work and acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think I just wanted to add my voice to your comments this morning about recognizing our 1-year anniversary. And I see Mike Howells just released his compilation of our responses to his questions about our reflections on the last year. And really great to see the different perspectives reflected in that article, but very positive was the tone. And I think that really mirrors and reflects what my experience has been here in Chambers in terms of the respectful working environment, the collaboration, the diversity of perspectives, but finding common ground, shared priorities, and really trying to work in the best interests of the residents of Vancouver, and that extends to the mayor and your leadership role, but all of the members of council, as well as the staff who support us in doing this work. And I just wanted to express my thanks and gratitude in terms of it's a very much a privilege to serve, and I know it's a role that everyone here around the table takes seriously, but also a privilege to serve with a great group of people who are fun, smart. We have lots of laughs around the room, but we also take our work very seriously, and I do really love the exchanging of ideas and great minds. So thank you to everyone here, as well as our staff who support us, and as well as the media as well, who allow us to share our views in the public realm. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Deschanova?
Thanks so much. Just building on Councillor Kirby-Young's comments, and it is top of mind for me as my notice of motion tries to address a way to honor our veterans in a small way all year round. So I'm looking forward to introducing that later in November. But I think that it's important, and I would like to be on record as thanking our veterans and our current serving members in the Canadian Armed Forces who are here or abroad right now, reservists who live in the city of Vancouver also, who are serving our country right now in peacekeeping missions and otherwise to make sure that we have the freedoms that we enjoy and sometimes take for granted the fact that we can walk down our streets rather safely compared to other countries and that we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I just wanted to note that. I also wanted to give thanks to the young kids at Shaughnessy Elementary School. I'm really enjoying seeing the poppies that were placed on City Hall lawn, and I think it's a great and fun way to engage kids in understanding Remembrance Day and truly what it means for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's it for those in the speakers queue. So can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Hardwick, seconded by Councillor Bly. All in favor? Any opposed? Nope. So we're adjourned. We'll see you back at 6 o'clock for the public hearing. Thank you very much. Well, Council, now call the public hearing of November 5th to order. Clerk, can we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart in the chair. Councillor Carr is on a leave of absence. Councillor DeGenova. Councillor Fry. Councillor Swanson. Councillor Hardwick is also on a leave of absence. Councillor Wiebe. Councillor Boyle is not in the chamber. Councillor Dominato, also not in the chamber. Councillor Bly. Councillor Kirby-Yung, also not in the chamber. You have quorum, Mayor Stewart.
Thank you very much. So first, we acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and we thank them for having cared for this land for many centuries and are enjoying working with them as we build this great city together. Also want to thank the great staff we have working here at the City of Vancouver who work every day to make this a fantastic place to live. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. Speakers will have up to 5 minutes to make their comments and should limit their comments to the merits of the report being considered. Sometimes there's a tendency to veer off into other topics, so I will steer you back onto the main topic at hand, the application at hand, as we move along. You should also state whether you support or oppose the project. Speakers may speak only once, with any additional comments submitted in writing to publichearing@vancouver.ca. That's publichearing@vancouver.ca. Those speaking on behalf of 3 or more persons or 3 or more organizations have up to 8 minutes to speak. A person or representative of the organizations must be present, identified, and must not be speakers themselves. Finally, if we don't finish the hearing this evening, we'll reconvene on Thursday evening, November 7th, here in Council Chambers. So I have the first item, the text amendments, and I'll have the clerk read out the application.
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw, including some RS district schedules to repair and clarify the regulations for the construction of basements and cellars in new houses. The proposed changes will strengthen the regulations and allow them to better meet the objectives intended when zoning changes were made in 2009 to permit the construction of full basements and cellars to improve the livability of basements and secondary suites. These changes are part of a wider review of current regulations for houses and secondary suites as a part of implementing the Housing Vancouver strategy and 3-year action plan. Since being referred to public hearing, Council has received 1 piece of correspondence in support of the application, 2 pieces of correspondence in opposition to the application, and 2 pieces of correspondence related to other aspects. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 3:30 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. We have Graham Anderson, the planner from the Housing Policy and Regulation, Community Planning, Urban Design, Sustainability. That's quite a long title. Here to present the application. Not sure if Council wants to hear from the application. Okay. Is anybody else? We're good. So if you could move ahead with your presentation, that would be great.
Thanks very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As mentioned, my name is Graham Anderson. I'm a planner with the Community Planning and Housing Policy Divisions in the Planning Department. This presentation provides an overview of the proposed amendments to the Zoning and Development Bylaw to repair, strengthen, and clarify regulations for new house construction in RS zones. The Housing Vancouver strategy set out several actions related to secondary suites, including to explore opportunities to expand the availability of legal suites and to review existing regulations for suites. A review was launched at the beginning of the year to assess the outcomes of the current regulations, and the scope of this review has been focused on new house construction. The addition or legalization of suites in existing homes is being explored as part of a separate work program. Zoning regulations for new houses were last substantially updated in 2009. Before then, a trade-off was necessitated between above and below grade floor area that resulted in many houses being built with small partial basements. Changes in 2009 enabled full basements by increasing the total allowable floor space ratio from 0.6 to 0.7, but sought to limit the visible massing of new houses by lowering the permitted above grade floor area and limiting the maximum footprint of the house. While changes were also made to facilitate basements that were less deep by increasing the permitted height of the main floor above grade, a corresponding change to limit the maximum depth of the basement floor was not made. The 2009 changes were intended to have several key benefits, including to enable more functional and livable basements and secondary suites. A review of new houses built more recently under these regulations has revealed that while almost all new houses are now built with a full basement, Other outcomes intended in 2009 are not being achieved. Compared to a decade ago, houses today are being built with basements or cellars that are deeper below grade, often at or near the maximum depth permitted to still be eligible for a secondary suite, which is 1.83 meters or 6 feet. An outcome of this shift has been that below-grade floors are less livable, and extensive below-grade construction is associated with a range of environmental and sustainability impacts. In particular, deep basements create compromised and inequitable living conditions in suites with very small windows and entries in deep pits. And houses built with cellars deeper than 1.83 meters cannot legally be converted to add a secondary suite in the future. Plumbing in deep basements is more likely to require pumping to the city sewer system as opposed to being able to connect by gravity. And this means that these living spaces are less resilient as fixtures can lose function during power loss events. Below-grade construction is highly labor-intensive and is a substantial cost factor in new house construction. Deep basements also increase greenhouse gas impacts as foundations, large pit entrances, and window wells increase the amount of concrete used compared to a house built with a slab-on-grade foundation. Deeper excavations mean large amounts of soil are removed and can make it more difficult or impossible to retain existing trees. And groundwater is more likely to be encountered, which then must be continuously pumped to the city sewer system. Excavation and below-grade construction on sites with problematic geotechnical conditions, such as peat soils, can impact soil settlement and create issues for the new building as well as those on surrounding sites. As part of the review, staff have engaged with the public and industry on these issues and the proposed initial repairs. A workshop with local designers and builders was held in June, and participants confirmed that their experiences align with the outlined issues and implications and emphasized the need for regulation changes to improve outcomes. Over the course of the summer, 13 pop-up events were held across the city to gather feedback from the public, and during these events, staff engaged more than 400 people. A Talk Vancouver survey was opened in July and September, which received more than 3,400 responses, and a public open house was held in mid-September to gather feedback on the proposed changes. Overall, residents indicated a high level of agreement with the need to address the issues identified and highlighted livability, accessibility, safety, and equity as top concerns. The majority of respondents also indicated they agreed with the proposed changes, and many expressed that basement suites are generally an unfavorable and less livable housing option, and that instead a greater diversity of housing choices, including triplexes, townhouses, and low-rise apartments, are desired. The results of these engagements are further summarized in Appendix C of the report, and a more fulsome review of the results of the Talk Vancouver survey can be found in the additional summary document that was included in the agenda package and posted online. The changes proposed are intended as initial repairs to address the worst-case outcomes resulting from the current regulations. The changes would apply only to new house construction and would not affect existing houses and suites or hamper the opportunity to add or legalize a suite in the future. The changes would not affect duplexes or conversions of eligible character houses to multiple conversion dwellings and do not change the number of suites that can be built with or added to a house. The proposed changes would limit the depth of secondary suites in new houses by no longer permitting them to be located in cellars, and thus requiring that they be less than 1.5 meters or 4.9 feet below grade, and that on sloping sites that the living spaces be located in the shallower portions of the suite. A change to no longer permit an external entry to a cellar in new houses is proposed to ensure that these spaces are not converted to include unpermitted rental accommodation in the future. Changes are proposed to increase design flexibility for new houses and to ensure those including a secondary suite can comply with the adjustments to permitted suite depth. These include expanding the height relaxation provision in the RS1 to permit new houses with suites to a maximum height of up to 35 feet if site conditions mean the house cannot otherwise comply with the new regulations. An additional relaxation is also proposed to enable houses with an above-grade FSR of 0.6 on sites where soil or hydrological conditions are unsuitable for deep excavation and below-grade construction. Minor amendments are also proposed to allow houses with secondary suites to have a second front entry below grade that faces the front street, and to extend the existing window area requirements for suites to the RS3 and 3A districts. And finally, changes to clarify existing regulations pertaining to the lowering of ground to provide windows or entries by adding guidance that is currently contained in an administration bulletin to the zoning regulations. In sum, the proposed changes are initial steps to address shortcomings in the current regulations and would begin to improve livability and other outcomes. They would increase design flexibility, further align the regulations across RS zones, and take steps to address public and industry concerns. And should these changes be approved, enactment would be targeted for March 2020 to account for time necessary to process in-stream applications. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've got a couple questions. Councillor DeGenova, up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My first question is regarding the up to 35 feet, that it talks about increasing height. Height has been a concern that we've heard about from the public in single-family residential neighborhoods, RS zones. It also includes a pitched roof, so this may limit or change the design or livable square footage, technically, of a home. Is that correct?
So the proposed change regarding height is just the extension of an existing relaxation in the RS1 district that would enable consideration of some additional height for houses in RS1, which are currently limited to a height cap of about 32 feet roughly. So it would allow for consideration of an extra few feet in a case where there may be a condition on the site that would make it challenging to build a suite and comply with the new minimum depth requirements. So it's just a case-by-case relaxation. It wouldn't be an overall height increase. And it's generally been designed to align with the other RS districts, which already contain provisions to allow consideration for height up to 35 feet, which do include the requirement for a pitched roof form. So it aligns with the other RS zones.
So would people that were moving forward with a new build have to get two separate development permits, which is what I've heard people have had to do before, one for a secondary suite and one for their main family home, the primary residence that they live in? Or would this all be done in one process through a new build?
It would be part of the same process for a new house permit.
But staff, as you just mentioned, and I want to confirm this, would have to individually look at each application to determine if there was an allowable height increase or relaxation?
That's correct.
Each new home in the city of Vancouver?
No, just in cases where an applicant may be proposing height and would like to access that relaxation to allow for some additional height. It would involve a case-by-case review of the proposal.
So, and I'm sorry, maybe it's the way I'm asking the question, but I'm wondering, I'm thinking about single-family residential home, the current guidelines the City of Vancouver has for builders. So if you're limiting that height in a basement, you're going to have to find that height somewhere else to stay within that height, or else you're going to need a height relaxation. So technically, that would be for any single-family residential dwelling in the city of Vancouver that was a new build. Is that correct?
Well, yes, the proposed amendments to the basement depth would apply to all new houses. But based on our testing, we understand that this should be achievable in most new house designs on standard lots. The relaxation in RS1 is meant to account for a situation where it may be challenging to conform with that lower existing height allowance, and then allow for a bit of extra height in a case where a new house is proposed with the suite. But generally, yes, there will be a required trade-off. That extra roughly 1 foot will have to come from somewhere. We know that what we found through our review of recent permits is that the depth of the basement below grade is largely being driven by a desire for really high floor-to-ceiling heights on the upper floors of the house, as well as for designs with the main living space in the house located closer to the level of grade. 1 foot is a modest change, and that will have to come from somewhere in the house, but we've accounted for that in RS1 where that height limit is lower.
So just looking for efficiency and staff time, and because this is, it would move forward as a text amendment, so technically it would affect every single new build, single-family residential home in an RS one zone or RS in RS zones, and I see that there's relaxations, would it not be more efficient for, like, was it a consideration of staff to increase the height so that each application wouldn't have to be looked at again, and there wouldn't have to be an application process in addition to the already, what we've heard, cumbersome processes to look specifically at that? Would it not be better to consider a blanket height increase?
We did consider the need to increase height generally, but we felt because of the modest nature of the changes and the fact that a house design that otherwise complies with our regulations could achieve the shallower basement depth, we didn't feel it was necessary to propose that at this time.
Thanks. I'll go back on. I do have questions about housing and the consequences.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle?
Thanks for this presentation. I'm also curious about the height restrictions, and particularly thinking about how we could get more accessible units, looking at the design and the not having any ground level. So I'm curious if it's part of the possibilities of relaxation that a new build could be taller if it had an at-grade suite that were wheelchair accessible, or where any conversation about accessibility has fit into these changes?
Yeah, accessibility is a key topic that came up during the course of the review, especially our engagement with the public. But really what's proposed here are initial steps to try to fix the worst case outcomes that are happening. And they don't really contemplate an entire shift away from the existing requirements, which in the RS zones essentially do drive basement construction given the limitation on above grade floor area. So as part of the ongoing work program, we will be looking at opportunities to shift the floor area potentially into different places and look to make proposals that would better address accessibility concerns more broadly. We do know some houses get built and sacrifice a basement level in order to really prioritize an accessible design with entrances flush at grade, but that's not really within the scope of the proposed changes tonight.
Okay, but might be something we'll hear about in the future. Okay, and then my other question is broader, which is I'm curious why we continue to favor or prioritize pitched roofs over flat roofs, given the benefits of more green and blue roofs and flexibility in design and many other.
Might defer to one of my colleagues on that question.
Paula Huber, Community Planning. I think it's a pattern that the city is familiar with. Pitched roofs has been part of the culture here in construction for over 100 years, and I think we're making some progress in order to allow flat roofs. We'd have to have a bigger conversation about a shift to flat roofs generally, to acknowledge some of those performance benefits that you've just outlined, and that would be part of like the phase 2 piece of this investigation.
Okay, is that already part of what we might hear back from in phase 2, or something we'd need to give some direction to see?
We are thinking about it, but if you'd like to add some comment or support for investigations on that line, we're welcome to hearing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation this evening. Just a couple of quick questions, just following on Councillor DiGenova's questions. You acknowledge here that we're not looking at adjusting the height limit other than relaxations in certain instances in terms of the particular site. But is that something sort of medium to long term you are looking at as a staff in terms of adjustments around that in RS zones specifically?
It certainly factors in, and of course we have mind to the idea that we've heard a lot about the need to look at other opportunities for additional housing choices that go beyond just the single detached house with an accessory suite. So we're really looking at height in terms of its ability to enable other housing forms. And within the scope of this review, it may be something that will come up in later phases. But for now, because of the modest nature of what we're proposing as far as initial repairs, we didn't feel it was necessary to propose any changes around height.
Okay, thank you. And just, you were very clear in your presentation that the application of this is really to new builds. But just curious for existing homeowners that may have secondary suites, would there be potentially implications if they were to undertake some significant renovations? Is that possible that we could see this being applied to existing homes, or is strictly, very clearly, this is about new builds and new builds only?
Yes. Yeah, the changes are limited to new builds only, only in cases where there may be some of the design flexibility changes that would actually better enable an existing house to add a suite. But largely the changes are exclusive to new builds, and we have designed the regulations to allow for existing houses that may have a cellar, technically a basement level that's deeper than what we would allow in the future should these changes be proposed, to still be eligible to add a suite if it complied with the regulations today.
Okay, thank you. And then just with respect on page 8, the limit of the depth of secondary suites in new houses, it talks about amendments to RS district schedules are also proposed to no longer permit a separate external below-grade entry to a cellar to help ensure they are not used as unpermitted rental accommodation. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that for me.
Yeah, so as part of the change, we're intending to make it quite clear that we would like to limit the opportunity for a secondary suite to houses that have a basement, which is a level below grade that's less than 1.5 meters or 4.9 feet. And to no longer permit houses that have a cellar, which is a below-grade level deeper than that, to include a secondary suite. And as a means of addressing the potential for that regulation to be circumvented, we felt it appropriate to change the regulations for cellars to no longer allow an external access into the cellar level, because we felt that that would be a potential way to help avoid those cellars that are built following any proposed regulations being adopted from being converted into a secondary suite, which we know would have highly compromised living conditions. And we're trying to send a clear signal that we no longer think that should be permitted.
Okay, so access would be only internal then, not external?
That's right.
To be clear? And again, still with new builds?
New builds only, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Yung?
Hi, thank you. Sorry if I'm kind of going over a couple of points, but I want to get my head clear around this. I'm wondering with the limit of the depth for basements, if you see any potential situation or consequences where people, and I would say coupled with the reference in the report that people are tending to want higher ceilings and build those. So if you see that as a disincentive for people to including secondary suites, because they would favor and not having more of those come into the market when we really need those units, because people would favor having the higher suites for the main floor living spaces.
Yeah, I mean, there is a trade-off, a modest trade-off. About a foot of height has to come from somewhere. And for applicants that may be looking to build a house with the main floor located at the level of grade, they would be making a trade-off to not have an opportunity to include a suite, and we recognize that. We expect it to be, if any, we expect the impact to be very, very modest, because most house designs are still within the ballpark of what we'd expect should these changes be adopted. But we can't say that there wouldn't potentially be some effect on the number of new houses that would be built with a secondary suite.
So we could potentially see some people electing not to include a suite.
It's possible, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and we don't feel that would work against our Housing Vancouver goals to put more rental units into the market?
It would be an impact. In Housing Vancouver, we haven't explicitly targeted secondary suites. It's not necessarily a priority housing type in Housing Vancouver. That being said, we do recognize that they are an important type of a secondary rental accommodation, and the changes are not meant to dissuade new house designs from including one. But we are first and foremost paying mind to the livability implications here. And I think that the proposed changes are modest in nature, and we would not expect a significant shift in terms of house designs to move away from including a suite where they might today.
Okay, and can you recap for me again why we wouldn't consider this in conjunction with a potential increase or relaxation on height or revisit on how the FSR on the main floor levels is achieved?
Just because we don't expect that to be a necessary change to achieve the proposed shallower basement level. Again, I think where we're seeing the deepest cellars with secondary suites and cellars that don't include one are really being driven by design priorities on the upper levels of the house. And so they're not necessarily prioritizing the delivery of a secondary suite in those houses anyway.
Okay, and for following up on Councillor Dominato's question, just walk me through the practical aspect. If somebody does put in that suite and I'm renting and it's only internal access, how do I get in now? I have no connection to a family. I'm accessing that suite. Can I do that separately? How does that work? If you don't have that exterior secondary access.
So we are only proposing to limit exterior access in the case of a cellar, which would then no longer be permitted to include a secondary suite. So it would be used as part of the house otherwise, but it wouldn't be permitted to have a legal secondary suite in it
So the
anymore.
access would need to be through?
It would be internal in the house or provided at grade. The proposed change would limit the opportunity to provide.
So if I'm a homeowner and I put in a suite and I intend to make it available for rental, for example, then presumably, again, and I'm looking to make sure we're not putting disincentives in the market, I probably don't want someone who's not part of my family going through my house. So again, is that going to be a disincentive, or unless I have the opportunity to put an entrance at grade?
So the opportunity to provide an external entry to a basement would remain. That's not proposed to change.
Okay.
So a new house built with a secondary suite in the basement would be permitted to have a separate secondary external entrance.
But it just needs to be at grade, is that right?
No, it could be below grade as well. The only thing we're proposing to limit would be a separate external entry to a cellar, which in a new house would not be permitted to have a secondary suite.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Dejanova, for your second round of questions.
I do. I'm wondering about the consequences this could have, similar to some of the questions Councillor Kirby-Yung had asked on our goals here at the City of Vancouver to provide the most affordable housing across the spectrum. I'm wondering if this also, and I heard different pieces that came back in your answers to Councillor Kirby-Yung and Councillor Dominato, but specifically to unlicensed suites where potentially a person is considering licensing them. I know the City of Vancouver had a secondary suite program. We changed that program. There's been some reports from Council and Housing to Council and Housing updates that those that maybe, we need to encourage people to license their suites. Do you think that, have you heard, and I'll ask about consultation afterwards, but is there any concern that people may now say, oh, I was going to move forward and license my suite, but now I'm not going to license it, and I'm either not going to rent it, or I'm going to continue to rent it unlicensed because these new home regulations, they believe, will apply to them if they do indeed move ahead and license their suite, or in not licensing their suite.
So we've designed these changes specifically to apply to only new construction, so new houses, and they wouldn't affect the opportunity to legalize an existing suite or add a suite to an existing house. We've exempted those previously existing houses from the requirement to have a shallower depth, so where they would be permitted today, they would continue to be in the future. And certainly we could prioritize making that clear in our communications in the future as they pertain to interested applicants looking at legalizing a suite. It's an important point and one that we wanted to highlight tonight.
Okay. I know our staff do excellent research and consultation, so I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the consultation, and if I don't see in this report any expectation that a suite is replaced. So is there any requirement in here that tear down an old house that either has a licensed suite or not a licensed suite, and further to Councillor Kirby-Young's comments and questions, that those suites, someone could choose to build a home without a suite?
There are no replacement requirements for secondary suites. And I may ask for a little bit more specificity if you're interested about particular parts of the public engagement process.
I was wondering sort of what type of public engagement, aside from the regular, I know that there's legal requirements about a public consultation process for a public hearing. Notice has to be given, ways to input to the city, but I'm hoping to know specifically, did you hold any stakeholder meetings with builders, architects, people who currently have secondary suites that are licensed, or in the process of moving forward with a new build?
Sure, yeah. As mentioned in the presentation, we held various engagement events. So we started by hosting a workshop with local architects, designers, and builders to share with them some of the findings from our review and get their feedback. And we largely heard that the issues that we highlighted that were part of the presentation tonight are in fact the experience of many of our local practitioners. As part of work underway exploring housing options in low-density neighborhoods, we also hosted a variety of pop-up events in locations across the city throughout the summer. We engaged with residents on housing choice, including the issues and implications of deep basements, and gathered a lot of feedback that way, and also encouraged folks to fill out our Talk Vancouver survey.
So I see that. What about specific stakeholder consultation with builders or architects?
Again, as mentioned, we hosted a workshop with local industry, builders, designers, and architects earlier in the year, and we also gathered some more feedback through a follow-up survey with them. And they were also invited to attend our open house, where we gathered feedback on the proposed changes and shared more details.
I'm trying to keep my questions concise. It's a public hearing, so I know I can ask questions unless someone else goes on the queue, I will. I do have a few more questions. I'm just wondering as to if there was consultation with, unless there is someone here from ACCS to comment on how this could impact or affect the city's goals and policies to end homelessness and prevent homelessness in the city of Vancouver, considering secondary rental and basement suites are some of the most affordable rental we have in our city.
Yeah, we don't have a representative from ACCS here, but I would just say generally that we don't expect that these changes have any impact on that part of the city's work. They're really designed about making modest improvements to the outcomes for new houses that are built in the city going forward. The changes are not meant to encourage any house construction that wouldn't otherwise happen. It's just about encouraging those outcomes to be improved.
Okay. Also, understanding some of the difficulties of moving through a process, especially single-family residential, because some people will move through that process themselves. What's the estimated approximate time average that it would increase for an application to increase height, as it's done on an individual basis and has to be considered by staff on an individual basis? I'm sorry to ask these tough questions, but they're questions that as councillors, after the policy is complete, will get asked. Sorry, council members.
So the proposed changes shouldn't affect the processing time at all. Again, they're not implementing any new requirements or changing how a house permit would be processed by the city, so it shouldn't have any impact.
So the extra request for increased height, so if that was denied, though, they would have to reconfigure their designs or their initial application. Is that correct? Or?
There could be design revisions involved in seeking a conditional relaxation, yes, but that's already currently part of our zoning regime, and is not something entirely new to the RS zones.
No, I understand. I'm just asking what if there was a design revision and staff went off and sent someone off to look at a design revision, or make a design revision. What would the processing time when that design revision came back? What would that be? Would that be 4 weeks for this, 6 weeks? Just trying to understand that part.
Well, staff are coming with that answer.
Thank you.
We're kind of at 13 and a half minutes for you
I'm
on
sorry.
these. But there is another, there's a chance for other questions after we hear from the public.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see anybody else in the queue for questions, at least in this round. So we'll move now to hear from the public, and we have two folks that are signed up. We have Richard Nantel and Bryn Davidson. Thanks for coming in. Up to 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mayor and members of council. I've got a lot more to say than 5 minutes. But anyways, you know, I came here tonight because I want to know whose objectives are we actually pursuing here. We're pursuing planning's objectives to change and upzone the neighborhood or make changes and all this. You know, what's really missing out of all this is, where's the public? Where are the property owners and the people that actually own the neighborhoods? And I think philosophically, you got to start thinking about, on my block, who owns that block? Does the planning department own that block? No. Does the city own that block? No. Me and my neighbors own that block. And none of my neighbors, just like the duplexing of all single-family neighborhoods, which was Visions Vancouver's final insult to neighborhoods in this city, nobody asked for these changes, and nobody's asking for planning's changes right here. And every time that you increase density, increase FSR to a house, what you're doing is you're increasing assessed values and taxation for people that already have single-family homes in this city, right?
So are you a supporter or opposed? I take it you're
I'm opposed to this because, you know what? I looked through the Vancouver Courier the last couple of weeks, and other than a little tiny legal notice and all this, there's been no talk. My neighbors, nobody knows that these changes are going through. And what you do is you have a planning department.
And now, sir,
let me finish, please.
Sir, we
just planning department that goes out, does little self-serving opinions.
Okay, sir, we're not impinging people's reputation here. We're trying to speak to this matter at hand.
You can say what you want, but the planning department has a manifest destiny to increase densities and basically destroy neighborhoods.
Can I turn you to the specifics of what you're objecting to here? Are there specifics with
I'm objecting to the changes because the public doesn't want them. The planning department wants them.
Okay, and that's your opinion? Are there anything specific that you would...
No, it's my neighbor's opinion. It's everybody's opinion that I talk to in my neighborhood.
Okay.
So, you know, like you can pretend that you're doing the public's interests here, but actually what you're doing is planning department's interests. And I was one of the guys, by the way, that was involved initially when we had the Vancouver specials, and this whole building was full, and they had to have public hearings down at the Hotel Vancouver because of the Monster House issues, and there was a reason why we created basement, was to get some of that FSR to make the houses less obtrusive and bulky and big, and to provide, you know, livable, good neighborhoods, not big square, you know, like boxes. And you know, the other thing too, if you keep on going in this direction, why don't you change RS1? I have a great idea. Let's change it to JAC 3-4. Junior apartment complexes 3 and 4, because with the 3, if you have just a house, you're allowed to have legally one secondary suite. And a lot of houses in Vancouver have more than one secondary suite, especially the big monster houses, plus the laneway house. And now with your new duplexing of so-called single-family neighborhoods, you're actually building quadruplexes because it's a duplex, and each duplex half is allowed to have a secondary suite in it. So basically, you know, we don't have single-family neighborhoods anymore. You know that, I know that, so why do you keep on calling them that? Against the height increase too. Everything that you're doing is accommodating the planning department and builders and designers. You're not protecting neighborhoods. If you want to try one of these great little experiments, and another key point that I really want to make here, I'm really opposed to doing things like this on a citywide basis. This is what Vision Vancouver did with secondary suites, laneway houses. Every time we came in here, the public came in here, there was hundreds of people opposed to it, but it was a sweet, done deal to begin with, just like this one's probably going to be, right? But, you know, the public is missing from this process. You're doing the densification of neighborhoods based on what the planning department wants. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you for coming in this evening. We have Bryn Davidson next. Thanks for coming in. Up to 5 minutes.
I'm Bryn Davidson. I'm co-owner of Lane Fab Design Build. And we design and build a lot of houses with basements. We don't want to build basements. We only do it because the zoning makes you do that if you want to max out the density. My clients are existing owners who don't want basements. And I think this is really a critical issue. Unfortunately, I think that the proposal that's in front of us today is fundamentally flawed, and I can't support it. I'm really hoping that we can go back and revisit this. Just as an example, I'm building 2 passive houses on Turner Street, side by side. One is a wheelchair accessible house, one has a basement. The wheelchair accessible house is facing a 400 square foot floor area penalty. It has to be smaller to be wheelchair accessible. The full-size house with a basement has 50% more concrete and rebar. The climate impact of that basement and all the wells is the equivalent of a Prius driving 50,000 kilometers. There's a substantial climate impact from forcing all of these buildings to be built down into the ground versus taking the exact same square footage, allowing it to be at grade, and allowing it to be wheelchair accessible. So that's when this process was started. I was hoping that what we would get was something very simple in terms of relaxing the height of these things so that any house in the city that wants to be could be built at grade as an accessible, lower climate footprint building. Unfortunately, the rules that we have, the cap of 0.6 above grade is not workable because it means you still have to have a partial basement. The height is only accessible on a conditional basis and only to houses with pitched roofs, which is just incredibly frustrating that we're having this whole debate about pitched roofs again. This limiting of basement heights from 6 feet to 5 feet. If we had done the first work properly, we wouldn't even have to have that discussion. But instead, you're taking these basement suites, which are limited not by the height of the roof all the time, but by the main floor height, and we're just squishing them, especially on sites with slopes and everything else. It's fundamentally problematic. I think there was a very simple way that this work could have been done, and I think that we collectively could be much bolder with our vision of what we're trying to do. We talk about a housing crisis, a climate crisis, and then we do these incremental little tiny tinkers that we've got to come back and fix again 6 months later. So I'm really hoping that we can go back and just do this right the first time. Let's allow these houses to come out of the ground. There's no reason to be putting stuff into the ground when we don't need to be. Thanks.
That's sir. Okay, thanks very much. You have some questions. Councillor DeGenova, please go ahead.
Thanks so much.
5 minutes.
I'm glad you addressed the accessible guidelines for laneway homes. I've heard this from people who are trying to build laneway homes or would like to live in the city of Vancouver, so have offered to finance a laneway home in a family member's, on a family member's property because they are they're disabled. They have a physical disability and they're in a wheelchair. So I'm wondering specifically, do you think that it actually punishes them to have less square footage to live in because they need more space, technically, off I guess it would be 33 by 120, 125 foot lot to have that laneway home, and you can't adjust that to move the home over. So you have to essentially make the home smaller to fit that. Is that?
Well, we're talking primarily about the main house as opposed to the laneway house. So you are absolutely paying a floor area penalty in order to do a wheelchair accessible home.
Widening hallways and bathrooms.
Well, just
turning
because
radius.
you're only building to 0.6 FSR instead of 0.7. So automatically, we built a home for a quadriplegic client with an elevator, and that home was substantially smaller than his neighbor's house who had a basement. And I understand the historic reasons why we ended up with basements, but we're at a point now where we don't have to just keep doing that just because we ended up there. Like we can allow these houses to come out of the ground, have a 3-story building. If we want to bring a house out of the ground, we've got to take the 2.5-story rule out of the zoning bylaw, which I don't think is being proposed. We have a duplex currently proposed, which was going to be able to be brought out of the ground, but the only reason we can't is because the zoning intent statement says it can only be 2.5 stories. So I think there's such simple ways that we could really make this work that benefits the climate, benefits accessibility, makes the building $20,000 less expensive. All of this, all a win-win. But we just need to take the simple path instead of creating this really convoluted document.
Okay, my second question for you is the question that I'd asked the staff before regarding processing times. I'm sure you are not a stranger to processing times, and do you feel that there would be? Are you concerned at all?
I'm very concerned.
An issue with processing times if your application, if you're told to go back to the drawing board, that could be an increased cost and more timely in the development process.
Absolutely, because I mean, I think that a conditional option is valuable, but it always takes longer. And so when I saw that this was being proposed as a condition in certain circumstances, if you have the right soils report or whatever, it's automatically going to take probably a month and a half more just to go back and forth with the additional approvals. This is what we used to do with laneway houses. This is what we're currently doing with our passive house projects, where we're seeking conditional relaxation. So I'm intimately familiar with how complicated that extra bit will become.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions from Councillor Kirby-Yung?
Hi, over here. Thanks for being here. I guess just to sort of follow up on that, because you've identified some of the concerns that I had in reading this report. Do you have a concern sort of being in the industry around these policies that have the conditional aspects? So it requires a lot of discretion from staff. So for example, the height being conditional, and you mentioned only available to pitch roofs or to be considered, as opposed to having clarity around a policy that is clear, because I worry that adds discretion and time.
Absolutely. It would be much simpler to just say, you want to build a house? Okay, we know we can build it at grade. And it's always the same. We can do that with every type of project, any style of house. Conditional for things like passive house and other things, it's nice to have that relaxation, but it always takes longer. And we should really be trying to shrink this bylaw instead of bloating it.
I agree with you. I'm a big fan of looking for clarity and simplicity so that there's less sort of human judgment and intervention that has to happen. Really intrigued by your comment around sort of the two elements, the accessibility and the sustainability aspect. So based on a lot of the projects that you do, and you talk potentially around, maybe you expand a little bit around going to a third floor, but in order to achieve a sort of a similar livability or number of units, what would be looking at in terms of what the form would look like or change in Vancouver neighborhoods?
It's basically the same, but just a bit taller.
And a bit taller being?
5 feet taller.
5 feet.
Yeah, because your typical basement is maybe 5 feet below grade.
Right.
You allow that building to come up 5 feet. You have same FSR, basically the same massing. It's just built at grade.
And would you agree that if the goal of this is to improve livability, that would improve livability a whole lot more than keeping people below ground, even if it's just 5 feet?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're doing all this crazy stuff to try and make these basement suites, livable and accessible, and they end up, especially where you have a laneway house and this big giant concrete well in the backyard taking up the whole backyard. It just drives me crazy designing these silly things for no good reason.
How challenging is it for you as a builder, given that, we live in a really beautiful place, but it's a little dark, notwithstanding the, debate around daylight saving times right now, to make spaces like that feel bright or welcoming or have natural light?
Yeah, it is. It's really hard because there's limits on how much well we can do. You just have these little kind of sliver windows. You're just looking out at a concrete wall. And when we try to do it tiered or landscaped, there's all these other concerns. So it's very frustrating because I hate making bad space.
Right.
And so I would really like, if I could do a simple 3-story building at grade, it would be good for everybody.
Do you find, a follow-up question if I can, and sort of related to this, do you find that some of what's proposed here or some of your clients, do you see more of an increasing need in terms of multifamily or more people sharing space that are looking for that but are restricted by regulations like this that want to cohabitate because of affordability concerns?
No, absolutely. Like so many of our projects are multi-generational. We built a house over on 22nd Avenue which had the parents in the lower suite and one couple in the upper suite, the one daughter, and the other daughter in the laneway house. And they were having to kind of carve out this big crazy thing to try and make it the parent suite not feel like it was this secondary lower form of dwelling, which is basically what we've done.
Right.
We've taken all the renters and shoved them in the ground.
Kind of like a lower caste system.
It's a lower caste system.
Right. Okay. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's it for questions. Really appreciate you coming in this evening. So that's it for folks on the list. And just going to call and see if there's anybody else here that would like to speak to this matter. Okay, got a gentleman coming in. Thanks for coming in. If you could state your name, you have up to 5 minutes.
Hi there, my name is Stuart Smith. I'm with Abundant Housing Vancouver. I wasn't planning on speak. I just came down to listen, but hearing Bryn and the previous speaker inspired me, so I'll just say a few words. First, echoing a comment about living below ground. If people have basement suites and they want to rent them, it should be okay to live in them. But I would echo Bryn's concern. We should not be expending a lot of effort to trying to make basement suites livable. We should be trying to give people above ground options. I've never met anyone who wants to live below ground. I've met people who live below ground because it is their best, most humane, livable, affordable option. I have never met anyone who says, I prefer living below ground. And yet most of our land, for a tenant, that's the only option they have. So I'm not an architect or builder, so I don't know enough about the ins and outs of RS to say if this is a net improvement or not, but it does seem like a lot of effort twiddling around people living below ground who don't really want to. So let's build the houses at grade and let's let them be taller. The second thing I wanted to mention is a comment the first speaker made about who owns blocks and who owns neighborhoods. And I can't object strenuously enough to the idea that landowners own blocks or neighborhoods or the city. The public owns the city, the public owns the neighborhoods, and the public owns the blocks. And the public are not landowners, especially in Vancouver, where 52% of people do not own any land whatsoever. So we cannot allow that to be part of our debate, to assume that if landowners don't want it, it's bad. So I support landowners' ability to do what they want with their land, but what we're talking about is forming a cartel of sorts where landowners band together and control what happens on their block or their neighborhood. And we shouldn't tolerate that whatsoever. So thanks for listening. Yeah, let's move on from basement suites.
Thanks. You have a question here of Councillor Dejanova.
Thanks so much. There are a lot of things I would like and wouldn't like to happen. I think that we've made a collective goal as a council. I mean, I've heard each and every one of us talk about the need to prevent and do our best to end homelessness in the city, as well as provide the most affordable housing. I see a spectrum of affordable housing. I see basement suites as being a place on that spectrum. And without basement suites, I would think that basement suites might just be that point right before homelessness. In fact, I know it. I've seen data and research on it. So if we're looking at a report here that asks us to endorse a program that could, in fact, decrease the number of secondary suites, because people may choose not to build a replacement unit due to these restrictions, or they don't want to put in for the extra height because they're concerned, be rejected. It might cause a time delay in their application. I'm wondering if those are concerns you have, understanding the affordability situation the City of Vancouver's in.
For sure.
Sorry, that's a lot.
Yeah, no,
Tried to get it all in.
I'll take it. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone here is saying that we should ban basement suites and kick people out of them. I think the reason that basement suites are affordable is because they are the least desirable form of housing. So if we move to a future where there are not basement suites, unless we've severely constrained the amount of housing, there'll be something else that is the least desirable and thus the most affordable. So I don't really feel like trying to make basement suites, trying to eliminate basement suites in new houses is going to destroy affordability. What I would say is if we believe that, well then let's make the houses bigger and have basement suites. Then we get the best of both worlds, right?
So you would instead, I'm very hesitant to amend on the floor of council when it comes to looking at small ways, because I do respect our staff and they've given a lot of consideration to this, but you would prefer kind of looking at increased height is what I'm hearing, or sort of something that's increased for everyone. It's not on a one-off basis, or it has to be considered individually.
I mean, a staff member said it earlier, like the feet have to come from somewhere. So if we want the basements to be nicer and taller, then the roofs have to be bigger. or like there's no there. The inside of the building has to match the outside of the building. So if we want the insides to be nicer and bigger, and if we want more housing, then the outside of the buildings have to be bigger. And yet we are so resistant to moving that roof line just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet.
So I'm not debating that, and I do have limited time. But there's two ways to get there. Either increase it for everyone, and then they can build within that, or have our staff look at that on a individual basis per application, which could take up a lot of staff time as well. So do you have a comment or an opinion on that? Because I think it does specifically, we're talking about text amendment here, or else I wouldn't talk about policy. Thanks.
I would always prefer outright. I think that just makes the most sense. Discretionary review is a great thing for things that are dangerous. I support discretionary review for pipelines and freeways. I do not support discretionary reviews for angles of roofs or sizes of basements. That's crazy. If somebody wants to build a basement, fine, build a basement. If you want to build a house that's 40 feet high, build a house that's 40 feet high.
Thanks very much for your time. That's it for questions.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak to this? This is my second call for speakers. If you like speaking, come on down and state your name. And I'm going to call one more time. Sir, would you like to say something? Yeah, please come forward. Just state your name and support or oppose, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Yes, hi, my name is Stefan Wiedemann. I appreciate that we're speaking about affordability and rental units, but there's also another issue on the table here, and that's for the homeowners who want to live in their home exclusively. And I think that limiting the access to the basement via window wells is a big mistake. It limits the livability of the basement for the family that wants to use it as well. I mean, whether or not they use it for a suite down the road is almost, that's not a matter for discussion. That would be something that zoning would address if they increased the height of the floor to 5 feet. But I think that limiting the access to basement suites, or not basement suites, pardon me, to basements in general is flawed. I think that basements should be made more livable if it's a suite or if it's a single-family house. That's just the one comment that didn't seem to be addressed with all these other speakers.
Thanks very much. I don't see any questions. Will you have your name for the record again, sir?
Yes, it's Stefan Wiedemann.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got that clear. Thank you very much for coming in tonight. Last call in for speakers. And I don't see anybody else, so thanks very much. Seeing there's no speakers, the speakers list is now closed. We haven't received any comments after 5 p.m. today, so I suggest to council we close the public comments and move on. If everybody's okay with that. And we're going to ask the staff to, but we've closed the speakers list now, and we're going to move on to staff. And if staff would like to say anything, please come forward and do so.
Thank you. So I just want to reframe this because there's been a lot of discussion about various topics tonight. The current single-family regulations all depend on a basement level in order to achieve the maximum floor space ratio of 0.7. In the slide deck that was shown earlier, in 2009, there was a concerted effort to reduce the mass of the house, reduce the floor plate, and push it down into the ground. So that's the environment that we're living in 10 years ago, but that's where we are. And so given that construct, what we were trying to do today was repair problems with really deep basements that we saw happening so that we could get a better quality basement level and secondary suites being built, because we were quite concerned when a new build is not meeting our livability performance objectives. That's a problem that we were trying to address. I think tonight we heard from speakers who had different perspectives. What do we expect in single-family areas? What are my objectives of the performance of houses in the neighborhood? Is it to match all the houses and keep everything looking the same? Or is it to change everything in a significant way to achieve objectives? We haven't had that conversation about the performance objectives around our single-family regulations, and we would need to do that in order to make some of the changes that were mentioned tonight and were addressed in the report. Do we want to improve accessibility in a big way? How far do we want to go on sustainability? How concerned are we about pumping in basements? All those topics need to be explored in a bigger way before we can make a substantive change to single-family regulations. And they all come back to what are the performance objectives? We're not trying to change that today. We're just trying to repair a specific problem with livability of basement suites. Now, be a part two in the future would be, let's rethink what we're trying to get from houses everywhere. What are our goals? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, Council, you can ask questions to staff if you like. I have Councillor DeGenova on the list for questions to staff. Okay, Councillor Boyle, do you have questions for staff? I can put you on the list.
I do, and actually it gets to the closing comments, I guess. I'm trying to gauge, these are some small changes that are necessary to correct things in the current policy, and there's interest in conversation about some perhaps more significant changes. So I guess I'm trying to gauge how complicated is it to be making some changes now and other changes not long down the road versus saying, let's wait and figure out actually what we want to accomplish here and then make those changes all at once.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boyle. Neil Rochoe, Community Planning. I think the complication of the conversation is that we want to make sure that the 400 units that are built next year and the following year really maximize the livability that we can possibly achieve at this moment in time, recognizing we are about to engage upon a citywide conversation about the future of Vancouver. And through that conversation with the public, we will be able to address what is the future of our single-family neighborhoods. What is the vision for how housing is going to evolve in Vancouver? And these are much bigger, much more substantive, complex questions that have a whole host of issues about sustainability, about climate response, about livability, about equity. And we fully embrace the need to have that conversation. And it should be done in a very fulsome way through a comprehensive program. What we're able to bring to council at this moment in time, before we invest that time in discussing with the public, are these small amendments to make sure that we better align the outcomes of our policy with the intent, and recognizing absolutely, we hear your comments, we agree with much of what's been said, but what we can bring forward at this moment in time is to really improve the outcomes over the next 12, 24 months until we have that fulsome conversation with the public.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Question from Councillor DeGenova.
Nope, I had a motion. I was prepared.
Question from Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I appreciate the intent behind a lot of this, but, you know, I have some concerns, and some of it from what Mr. Davidson was saying earlier today, who has been here all day, apparently, like the rest of us. But it's surrounding stuff like flat roofs and versus gabled roofs and stuff. And I know that here in the section 4 of the appendix A, or is it B, it really gets into some of that roof line stuff. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest concerns, that if we're reducing the amount of basement area below grade, and I appreciate the intent behind that, but we're not at the same time addressing the stuff above and solutions that might dovetail more with our Blue Way strategy and all those things that we talked about just earlier today with the flat roofs. I'm struggling with the extent of some of those components, and I'm wondering if you can walk me through the benefits of specifically the roof heights and pitch as is struck in here.
Just to clarify one thing that you mentioned there, we're not proposing any reduction in basement floor area. The proposal just relates to the maximum depth below grade.
Sorry, that's yeah. My apologies. That's what I was intending to sort of convey. I guess where I'm struggling with is that the height hasn't changed, and that we've put these restrictions on roof pitches and flatness in, is that 4.17?
Ryan Dinh from Planning Department. So the change that we proposed today only affect the RS. The increase of building height only affect RS1 zoning, and the rest of the zone RS district schedule in RS5, 6, and 7 have already allowed 35 feet for single-family houses with the requirement of the pitched roof. So the discretionary provision that we propose today will be in line with other zones in RS. That's the intent.
Which is inclusive of the flat roof considerations then that are mentioned in 4.3.4 here. So 4.3.4 talks about the height limitations and the pitch of roofs, that all roofs except roofs covering from the first story have no flat portions, have a minimum slope of 7:12 ratio, et cetera. You're saying that's consistent with all the RS?
That's correct. And the new regulation for duplex also requires 35 feet high for pitched roof. So it's consistent across the board.
Okay. You looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah, just to clarify that the intent of requiring a pitched roof form, as Ryan mentioned, is to conform with the other RS zones, which have a pathway to achieve a 35-foot high building, but in doing so require a pitched roof form. The proposal for the additional relaxation in RS1 was designed to align with those existing regulations in other RS zones.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it looks like Councilor DeGenova on the list.
Yes. I have a referral motion that I'd like to put forward.
Yeah, I think we have to. I know that's fine. We would move a referral motion before the motion's on. Right, so you'd be moving a report, but with the referral motion added.
No, I'll be moving this instead of the.
Yeah, but it's the motion that's on the floor.
Yes, I've noted the name of the exact report.
Right.
An item in there. So yes,
Okay.
Sorry.
Great, and we need that to be seconded. Councillor Bly is seconded, so Councillor DeGenova, you have
Thank you.
up to 5 minutes for debate.
First of all, I want to thank our staff because I know that there is a lot of time and thoughtfulness that has been put into this, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about making our city a more livable place. I agree. I've lived in a basement suite before, and it wasn't my favorite place to live, and I'm not saying that other people have that option. I don't live in a basement suite any longer, but I do realize that it is still contributing to affordable and some of the most affordable market rental housing that we have in the city of Vancouver. And I think about some of the comments that have been made by the speakers, and I appreciate them. But I wonder if someone living in a basement suite right now would say that they would prefer it not to be, maybe they'd prefer it more to be above grade. However, at the same time, I think they'd prefer to live below grade than to be homeless. That's what I've heard before as well. It shouldn't have to be a choice, but considering the housing crisis that our city faces and the fact that I see us just trying to keep our heads above water and tread that water, and with no consideration in this report for needing a replacement or incentivizing a replacement. And I just didn't read that there. I appreciate the work that staff have done, and that perhaps legally we can't go through that and look at replacement. That might be a completely different text amendment. But as we move towards our housing update that I understand will come next month, that will talk about how we're going to move forward to prevent and try and make sure that we really do make a difference in the homelessness crisis that we already face in our city, that faces us every day here and that's on my mind every day. I can't in good conscience move backwards and do this until we have more affordable housing and more affordable options. So I think at some point I could move forward. I also, in my referral, that states, for those who can't see it, the council refer text amendments, or council refer this report, and the name of the report is stated there, to staff to explore how the proposed recommendations may impact the replacement of secondary suites and affordable secondary basement suites in the city of Vancouver. Furthermore, the policy adopted by the City of Vancouver to increase affordable housing, accessibility, prevent and end homelessness be considered if staff return to council with recommendations on this matter. So I also have heard from our own staff that it's hard to keep up with processing in DBL and that we're having a hard time with that. So to individually look at each and every home in an RS zone, if we're going to talk about the zone as a blanket, I think that we should be looking towards, and I think Councillor Kirby-Yung had some good points in her comments and questions about increased height. Councillor Dominato also noted increased height. I appreciate Councillor Boyle's comments as well on livability and moving towards that. And I'm not saying no, I'm just saying that I think there needs to be a consideration for how this could have the unintended effect of either encouraging people not to build a basement suite or encouraging them not to ask for that extra height or backlogging permits more than we've seen if it has to go back to staff, go back to the applicant for redesign of some components and then back to staff. Also, prescribing pitched roofs. I think that what staff said was very much, I agree. We are moving forward together on a citywide plan. And I've stated that during that planning process, every vote that I make, and I just actually answered a reporter on this, every vote that I make is with the goal of trying to make housing more affordable in our city. So for that reason, I've moved forward this referral motion, and I would hope that this would be something that would address some of the concerns, including accessibility. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Boyle?
So I too share some concerns about what was put forward, and I think it makes sense to approve it as is and then continue the conversation. So I won't be voting, I won't be supporting the referral. My preference would be that we approve the recommendations as they are and then move on to have the ongoing robust conversations that we need to be having on this, but no point, I think there's no point in delaying these necessary changes and continuing to have a year or two of deep, dark basements while we get to the further changes that I also would very much like to see happen in supporting more accessible units and bringing renters above ground and allowing flat roofs, other radical ideas like that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you. Happy to speak to the referral. I'll keep my comments brief, but thank you for staff for bringing the report forward. It's pretty clear for me that this is an attempt to address regulatory change that really didn't meet the intended outcomes. That was very clear from the report. This is a corrective measure. That being said, I was really compelled by Mr. Davidson's comments about the opportunity to look at ground level access instead of digging down and continue to have basement suites. And I recognized, to Councillor Boyle's point, is this is corrective. You don't want to continue seeing this go forward the way it is. However, I do note in the report that the policy, the change was in 2009. It's been in place for 10 years. It was just only this year that we undertook a review of secondary suites, and that began in early of 2019 to sort of assess the outcomes of the policy. So from my perspective, to take a little bit of extra time, even if it's a couple of months, to sort of explore opportunities to do this differently, I think it's better to do that than to sort of move ahead with this now, because while I realize that there may be a few more homes that go forward, in the meantime, I'd rather take a bit more time because, again, we just started the review this year and the policy's been in place for 10 years. But do appreciate that it is really corrective in nature and that you've identified a gap and that your outcomes aren't being met, the intended outcomes of the original policy. But I do support the referral in that regard.
Thanks very much. Councillor Dejanova, you have about 12 seconds left in your clock.
I just wanted to really quickly say that I agree with Councillor Boyle. I would like to bring people above ground, but I'd also like to bring people off the street and make sure that we are doing our part to end homelessness in the city.
Okay, thanks. That's your full 5. Councillor Kirby-Yung.
Thank you. I also, when I first read this report, it immediately raised concerns for me, more along the lines of not good intent, but unintended consequence, I think. And I think that some additional time, I think because staff are really good at hearing feedback and kind of coming back and incorporating it and addressing it, is worthwhile. And I think that if, sort of motivated, I don't think that it needs to take an undue amount of time, but I am concerned, and I did hear some answers to questions around the fact this applies to new homes, but what about, someone's renovating or their suites? And they said, well, not to permitted, but we also have a lot of unpermitted that we're trying to encourage people to make available. And so I haven't heard sort of enough to allay some of the concerns that were raised for me. And in fact, I'm now considering kind of motions around broader policy around livability net grade. But I recognize that right now we want to sort of stick with what's in front of council tonight in this very defined public hearing, which is this particular report. But I do support the referral because I think that it would be the best course of action to give staff a chance to come back and address some of the concerns that have been raised by council today and maybe walk through them to with a bit of additional thought and to alleviate some of the questions that councillors have raised and some of the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, I'm struggling with part 2 here of the recommendation that talks about further that policy adopted by the City of Vancouver decrease affordable housing. I'm assuming that staff use these lenses on everything we do in the City of Vancouver. Prevent and end homelessness policy. I'm just struggling on which policies that staff would think that they would be coming back with to use that lens through this. And there's a lot of lenses we use in the City of Vancouver. So I also really heard from speakers and recognize accessibility and access to units is important. The great comments on what we could do to do better for climate change. I do recognize that this does introduce relaxations for sites with soil hydraulical conditions are not suitable for basement constructions is a good idea. So there are elements I think this are good. I think, as well as Councillor Boyle, I think we need to move forward in the sense that these are going to help out some of the issues now, but we really need to look bigger picture moving forward. And I know there's some reports coming back, but I wouldn't want new suites to be built that are really not going to be livable in the sense moving forward. So I will be voting against the referral.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else on the list, so we'll go for the vote. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's failed. So Councillor Boyle, Councillor Wiebe, Councillor Swanson, Councillor Fry, and myself in opposition. So just 1 second, Council. So Councillor Boyle, I have you on the list.
I just wondered, because the referral was moved, if I need to now move the original recommendations as contained in the report, which I'd be happy to do.
Okay, thank you. So we have that moved and need a seconder. Okay, Councillor Dejanova, thank you. And we can move to debate this motion. So Councillor Boyle, do you have anything else to say?
No, I would just encourage us to vote on this one because we have many other items on our agenda.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dejanova, you have the floor of the 5 minutes.
I'm sorry I won't be able to support this. I was hoping that we would be able to move forward, even if we were able to, and I was considering specific amendments that, I could live with and I could support, including increasing the height up to a certain amount for every single home in an RS in the zone specifically outlined here. But my concern with that is there hasn't been adequate consultation with the public. And I was reminded, although I don't want to say that I agree with everything Mr. Nantel did say, and I appreciate the mayor for making sure that our staff's good work is recognized and their reputations aren't impugned. Something he did say was true. There was a blanket policy for a lot of homes last term with individual regulations or restrictions that would be looked at by our staff. I also appreciate what planning has put together and has brought to us, but I'm very aware of the permit backlog that we face, and it's one of the reasons that I put forward put forward a motion that ended in a policy looking at expedited, processes. And I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the work that our staff do. And it's hard for me not to support this because I want livability, but at the same time, this leaves me with no comfort that there will be replacement. This also leaves me with a very big concern that there will be a backlog in TBL that will affect other permits on affordable housing, on workforce housing, on the housing that we have committed to as a council. So I really want to thank staff. I know that this is a lot of work to bring something to public hearing, and it's not something that I take lightly. In fact, I feel very good about the decisions that I've made for affordable housing, and thinking about what we're going to leave Vancouver with for the next generation, including my kid. So we are the third least affordable city, and I agree with Councillor Boyle. A dingy basement suite isn't a place anyone wants to live. But is it better than living on the streets? And what's next? Do we say to everyone that's in an SRO or to BC Housing, there's a new standard? I think that, we have to really consider the unintended consequences of this. And for that reason, I won't be able to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Weep.
I'm hopefully that staff have heard the comments. I think that there's some work to be done to really kind of upgrade our full system. And I know there's a lot of work looking at secondary suites and what that looks like and building codes and blue-green roofs and access to nature and light. And so I think this is just a step, but I really think that we need to make kind of a paradigm shift in how we're building homes that really look at the livability for every suite in it. And as well as some of the speakers spoke, people want to be able to have their buildings and be able to use the basement suites and be able to use their house the way that they feel fit to ensure their families. So I think we need to ensure that we are listening to the people that are wanting to live in their buildings and want it to move forward, but also recognizing what the next generation and what we're providing. And so I don't want suites that don't have any light, because that is such a critical component to people's livability. So I will be supportive, but I do think we have some work to be done moving forward. And I know that staff, and I want the people that come speak next time as we continue to find more livable ways for our city to move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to just highlight that this, I appreciate the clarification you gave around getting the R1 in line with the other stuff, and really that this applies to new homes, and this isn't necessarily affecting the renovation of a character home or those kind of considerations that we've heard elsewhere. So I think that that's important to highlight. And I do want to acknowledge that I think, I'm challenged with elements of this. I think there's work to be done. Obviously, we're embarking upon that work now in the part of the citywide planning process, and we'll be looking at a lot of these things. And certainly we've heard the advantages of flat roofs and these kind of things for, more responsive to water and climate change. I think that I have to agree with Mr. Smith, who countered the other speaker, Mr. Nantel, about who owns the city and who owns the blocks. I think planning is a critical discipline. We, the city, own the pipes, the streets, the roads, the infrastructure. We own the city, we the people, and how that works is a critical function of planning. So I appreciate that the work that you're doing is part of a larger fabric of how we maintain and grow our city. And I appreciate that there will be continuing work moving forward on this. So thanks for the work that's gone into this, and I'll be voting in favor.
Thanks. Councillor Dominato.
Thank you. And just to follow up some of the comments, I obviously supported the referral, and that has failed, and I know that this will pass this evening. I personally will support it this evening, and the reason being is I actually can't stand when we put in place policies and then we find out they're not meeting our intended outcomes. I do think, as Councillor Weeb and Councillor Fry indicated, there's obviously more work to be done, and I hope that in your comments you're hearing this evening from council, I was really compelled by Mr. Davidson's comments, and I think aspirationally looking at how we do things differently. And the reason I'm going to support this tonight is because of the livability factor, is I would rather see us get back closer to the intended outcomes of the original policy, so that we're not having houses dug deeper to have these and to have deeper basements with small windows and lack of access to light. But I really don't think we're going far enough in this. I think there's a compelling argument made this evening for us to be really thinking outside the box, and why not be doing ground level accessibility. And I would hope, and maybe I'm new to this council, but I would hope that when we are implementing policies that we're reviewing them more frequently than every 10 years, because perhaps we could have addressed this 8 years ago or 7 years ago. And again, that's not a criticism as much as a how do we learn from this is something, and maybe it has been done. I'm looking at what I have in front of me, and that's all I have to go by is the report that states that. But so I will support it this evening because I'm a pragmatic person, and I'd rather us get closer to the intended outcomes. But I really want us to look at sort of the broader conversation of sort of ground level access and that additional potential height. And thank you, Mr. Davidson, for sort of bringing those insights to the evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, before we move to Councillor Bly, I have a point of information from Councillor Dejanova.
Thanks. My point of information specifically is for you, Mr. Mayor. We are in a quasi-judicial type hearing, and we have very strict public hearing rules. I have heard councillors in their closing comments give staff direction that, or say that they understand that staff may consider changes to this. I just wanted to confirm through you, this is a public hearing. These are text amendments. This will be implemented. The only way this would come back is if staff brought it back to public hearing or council through policy and acted something else at a council meeting. Is that correct?
Yep, this will be enacted if we vote in a positive today. So that's correct. Staff can, I allow leeway in people's closing comments to sometimes speak out of the box because it's hard to control it. But you're correct on the core of that. Okay,
so just to clarify, if any changes were made to this, it would have to come back through a referral process or to a new public hearing, or staff would have to bring it back.
Yes,
that's correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bly.
It's like Councillor Dejanova was actually in my mind while making that point of information. So whether I vote against or abstain, I don't feel comfortable voting in favor of this report. I appreciate the work from staff, but I feel like we've heard a lot of mixed reviews, and we are in a quasi-judicial role here, different than if this was this morning and we're looking at staff recommendations. So because of that fiduciary responsibility, I feel like I cannot confidently vote in favor of this report because of the legal grounds of which we are enacting something that seems to have a lot of questions still on the table by the comments that have been made around council floor. So for that reason, I will be either abstaining or voting against.
Great. Thanks very much. I don't have anybody else on the queue, so I think we can move to the vote. And let's see. So Councillor Boyle. Great. Okay, so this has passed with Councillor Kirby-Yung and Councillor Dejanova in opposition. Thanks very much, Council. Okay, so now we're moving to rezoning of the Ash Street property. I get the clerk perhaps to read the application.
This is an application by Wiedemann Architectural Design to rezone 6288-6290 Ash Street from RT1 District to RM8A District to permit a townhouse development with a floor space ratio up to 1.2. The form of development will be reviewed through a subsequent development permit process. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was referred to public hearing, and this represents all correspondence received up till approximately 5 p.m. today.
Great, thank you very much. We have Alicia Desjardins here. Sorry. Sorry about that.
All good.
Here to speak to us. And about all Canby townhouse applications on today's agenda. We've seen a number of these, Council. If you'd like to see the presentation, or perhaps we waive it, you suggest we might waive this?
Yeah, if it's council's wish, this can be waived.
Okay, thanks. Everybody okay with that? Okay, thank you. So is the applicant team here to speak to the application of 6290 Ash Street? The applicant team here? Let's see, just put up your hand if you're the applicant team. Don't see the applicant team here. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see your arm there, sir. Thank you very much. Did you just speak to this or just answer questions? Thank you very much, sir. So are there any questions from council to staff or the applicant? And again, this is the only period of time you can ask questions to the applicant. You can ask questions to staff after we've heard from the public. I have Councillor Wiebe on the queue. Please go ahead, Councillor Wiebe, up to 5 minutes.
I have two questions to staff. One is on the connections east-west. I know that there's been a lot of development here along Ash and along Canby, and I'm wondering, because it's a 5-block or 4-block block without a break, I'm wondering if we have looked at east-west connections for people to walk through in this area.
Correct. There is a mid-block connection from Canby to Ash Street. However, that will be accomplished on the property just south of this subject property.
Okay, and second question, we just passed a blue-green initiative this morning, and obviously this is sitting on the creek that comes across. I'm just wondering, have we looked at how this works with the creek that connects down to the Fraser River?
Sure, just one moment. I can look at the rezoning conditions and see if there's any conditions about the existing creek. Mohammed will come up and speak to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. We look at the water course covenants. Usually when there is an old stream crossing a site, we ask for a water course covenant, which means that the developer is responsible for protecting the old stream if they encounter the old stream during the excavation, and then they have to provide, if they encounter the old stream, they have to provide a solution to mitigate and protect the old stream. Usually these old streams are buried, so we don't see them, but if there's an opportunity to identify them, we ask them to protect them and provide the covenant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's it, Councillor Wiebe. Okay, so we have no more questions to staff or the applicant, and now we'll hear from the public. We don't have anybody on the speakers list, but I will call 3 times. If anybody here would like to speak to this application, please come down to the microphone and state your name and whether you support or oppose the application. I'm going to call once. By law, we're required to call 3 times, so I'll call twice. And I don't see anybody coming. 3 times. Okay, thank you very much. Seeing there are no speakers, the speakers list is now closed. And we haven't received any public comments after 5 p.m., so I suggest we close the whole public comment section and move on to hearing from staff or closing comments. So does the applicant have any closing comments at all? Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Staff have any closing comments?
No closing comments.
Thank you very much. Council have any questions? Councillor Dejanova? Nope. Okay, thanks. Council have any questions for staff? I don't see any questions, so we'll move on to, would someone like to move this? Councillor Kirby-Yung, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Boyle, thank you very much. If there's any debate, could you put your name on the list, Council? I don't see anybody there, so we can move to calling the question. And that's unanimously passed. Thank you, Council. We'll move on to the next rezoning on West 45th Avenue.
This is an application by 376392 West 45th Avenue GP Limited to rezone 376392 West 45th Avenue from RS1 District to RM8A District to permit a townhouse development with a floor space ratio up to 1.2. The form of development will be reviewed through a subsequent development permit process. Since being referred to public hearing, Council has received one piece of correspondence in support of the application. This represents all correspondence received up till approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. And we've waived the presentations, but is the applicant here? Just put up your hand. There you go. Did you wish to present anything, or are you just here for questions? Just for questions? Okay, thanks. Staff, Council have any questions for staff or the applicant? I don't see anybody on the queue. And we have no speakers formally listed, so I'll call the audience. Does anybody here wish to speak to this application to 376-392 West 45th Avenue? Going twice. And that's 3 times, so thank you very much. So we'll close the speakers list, and since we haven't any comments after 5, we'll just close this section of public comment and move on to debate and decision. Applicant have any closing comments? Thanks very much. Staff have any closing comments?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Council have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, can I have somebody move the motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young, seconded by Councillor DeGenova. Any debate? If you just put your name on the list. Don't see anybody on the list, so we'll call the vote. Council, that's passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 2C, rezoning on West 31st Avenue.
This is an application by JTA Development Consultants to rezone 615-623 West 31st Avenue from RS1 District to RM8A District to permit a townhouse development with a floor space ratio up to 1.2. The form of development will be reviewed through a subsequent development permit process. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was referred to public hearing. This represents all correspondence received up till approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thank you very much. And we've also waived this this presentation on West 31st. Is the applicant here? Great. Would you like to present or just stay for questions? Great. Thank you very much. Is there any questions from staff, from council to the applicant or staff? Don't see anybody on the queue, and I don't see. Nope, there were no speakers formally registered to speak. So, does anybody from the audience wish to speak to this? First call. This is the rezoning on West 31st Avenue, 615 to 623. Going twice and calling a third time. Okay, so no one wishes to speak to this from the public, so we'll close the speakers list now and close the receipt of public comments. And just wondering if the applicant has any closing comments. No? Staff have any closing comments?
No closing comments.
Thanks. Does council have any questions for staff? Don't see any. Okay, great. So I need somebody to move the motion. Councillor DeGenova, thank you very much. Somebody else want to second it? Councillor Bly, thank you. Any debate on this, council? Don't see any. Okay, so we'll move to the vote. Councillor Kirby-Young, just waiting for your vote. Thanks very much. That has passed unanimously. Thank you. And we're moving on to rezoning on West 31st Avenue, 643 to 683.
This is an application by Belford 31st Nominee Limited to rezone 643-683 West 31st Avenue from RS1 District to RM8A District to permit a townhouse development with a floor space ratio up to 1.2. The form of development will be reviewed through a subsequent development permit process. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was referred to public hearing. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. And is the applicant here? Great. Hello. Would you like to speak to this or just answer questions? Okay, thanks very much. Does council have any questions for the applicant or staff? I don't see anybody on the queue. So we'll move forward to the public, and I don't see anybody listed formally. Would anybody like to come from the audience to speak? Calling once, twice, 3 times. Okay, thanks very much. So no one wishes to speak to this, so we'll close the receipt of public comments. And applicant have any closing comments? Thank you, staff.
No, sir.
Thank you. Council, have any questions? Don't see any. Okay, somebody like to move the motion then? Councillor Bly, seconded by Councillor DeGenova. Is there any debate? I don't see anybody on the list. So we can vote for this one? Vote on this one? Just waiting for Councillor Dominato. That's right. Thanks. That's passed unanimously as well. We're going on to the final one of these on 5538 Willow Street.
This is an application by Matthew Cheng Architects to rezone 5512-5538 Willow Street from RS1 District to RM8A District to permit a townhouse development with a floor space ratio up to 1.2. The form of development will be reviewed through a subsequent development permit process. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was referred to public hearing. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. The applicant team here? Great. And would you like to present or just answer questions? Thanks very much. Okay. Any questions from council to staff or the applicant? Let's look at the list here. Don't see anybody on the list. So there's nobody listed formally from the public to speak to this, but I'll call from the audience. Does anybody wish to speak to this application? Going once. Going twice. Calling a third time. Don't see anybody. Thanks very much. So we're going to close public comment at this point. Does the applicant have any closing comments? Thank you. Staff?
No comments, sir.
Any questions for staff? Don't see anybody on the list, so I need a motion. Thank you, Councillor DeGenova, seconded by Councillor Kirby-Yung. Any debate on this one? I don't see it, so we'll call the vote. There we go. So that's unanimously passed as well. Thanks very much, Council. Moving on to rezoning, the third rezoning on West King Edward Avenue and Ash Street.
This is an application by W.T. Leung Architects Incorporated to rezone 620-644 West King Edward Avenue and 4111 Ash Street from RS1 District to CD1 District to permit the development of 2 4-story residential buildings with 57 strata-titled units, including townhouses at the lane, a building height of 13.95 meters, and a floor space ratio of 1.82 are proposed. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was referred to public hearing. This represents all correspondence received up till approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thanks very much. We have Tess Monroe here from Planning. And would anybody like to see the anybody not want to see the presentation? Sorry. Do you want to waive the presentation? Everybody okay with waiving it, or okay? Great. So that's all right with you. We'll waive the presentation.
I will note that I have had one question from council between referral and public hearing that I had a slide that I would like to address if council would like to hear it.
I have Councillor Swanson on the list as well. So perhaps we could do, Councillor Swanson, did you want to ask questions of staff? Is that what you're? Gotcha. Okay, let's see what happens.
If we can go to slide 9. Between referral and public hearing, staff received a question from Council regarding Appendix F of the Council report. As seen in your package and on the screen, this appendix tracks the progress of the achievement of public benefits within the Canby corridor north of 57th Avenue. As you can see in the vertical bar graph, all housing units approved in Canby corridor are shown based on housing type. The question from Council is what income ranges do these units serve and how are they compared to the income breakdown of the Vancouver population in general? The overall breakdown of income levels of the total Vancouver population is provided for reference on this slide. In Canby Corridor, recently approved strata housing has typically been serving those making above $80,000 per year. It is difficult to compare this income distribution with the city as a whole, as this is a specific plan for a defined area. This is a 30-year plan, and it is intended to provide a range of housing types and affordability levels, including rental, below-market rental, social housing, and housing for families. Many of the privately initiated rezonings have delivered strata housing as part of Phase 2 of the plan and have provided CACs to help to pay for the social housing units already delivered in the corridor. Other areas incentivize secured market rental housing projects through additional density or require a mix of strata and social housing. Many of these are Phase 3 sites and include housing types that serve lower incomes. The bar graph in Appendix F will look different as the plan implementation progresses further and we have more affordable units delivered by private developers or by the city.
Councillor Swanson, did you want the full presentation or would you like to just move the questions to staff? Okay, so I'm just going to go through this script and I'll leave you on until we get there. Thanks so much. Is the applicant team here to speak? Right, would you like to speak or just answer questions? Thank you very much. Councillor Swanson, I'm going to advance you on the queue and you have up to 5 minutes for questions to staff or the applicant.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this Appendix F, page 1 of 2. Thank you, staff, for putting that there, where you have the public benefits implementation plan and you have the number of units completed, under construction, approved, and in review. So I added them all up, and I got, if you assume that they're all going to get built, which I know is not necessarily true, but if you add them all up, there's 71% strata, 20% rental, 9% social, and of the social, only 1/3 has to be at Hills, right? And Hills is 51,500. So I'm thinking there's nothing really there for anybody under 50,000, which is half of renters. So I'm wondering if this is the best use of our public benefits money to go into housing that's mostly at the higher end.
Appendix F just shows the units that have been approved to date. As I mentioned in the presentation, there are still many social housing and rental housing units that are to be delivered as part of the plan. These are in many of the inclusionary housing sites around the Oak Ridge Municipal Town Center and in some of the larger unique sites. So this isn't supposed to be a comprehensive list of all the projects we expect, but rather a snapshot in time of what has been already approved.
Actually, what I'm looking at, and it's pink, it says 1,445 units completed, 1,337 under construction, 3,947 approved, and 3,991 in review. So that's the total that I was taking.
So it would be in review currently. It doesn't include any other projects that have yet to come into the planning department.
So you're saying that there are other projects to come that would be affordable to people that are earning under 50,000?
Yes, there are a number of sites within the Canby corridor that are dedicated to serving either 50% market and 50% social housing, or include a rental bonusing density for rental that include a 20% below market component.
But even 50% social, that's just 30% of 50%. That would be under 50,000, right? Sorry to be so picky.
Nope. Allison Dunnett, Senior Planner, Affordable Housing Programs, Arts, Culture, and Community Services. Councillor Swanson, I believe the point you're making is about the social housing definition and the minimum requirement for a social housing project, which is that the 30% at Hills. So if I'm following your question, you're really asking about, are we delivering social housing units that are going to meet household incomes below the Hills threshold,
So,
low income?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the right supply, right? In my head, the idea about the right supply means everybody in the city, we evidently have an equity strategy, and they should be getting more than 3%.
So the city has targets for delivering social housing, and we have a focus on getting more operating grants through our government partners to ensure we can provide social housing units that meet that deeper affordability, such as shelter rate units. I don't off the top of my head have how many projects are in development where that is a discussion point with BC Housing and other partners about delivering that deeper affordability, but it's always something when we negotiate on a project that we are trying to ensure we get some inclusion in future projects.
Thank you. So there's some 300 and some million in CACs from this Cambie Corridor project. Could we say that we want X proportion of this dedicated to housing for people under 50,000?
That would have to be something that council reviews at a deeper level. You're talking about the CAC policy and where different portions of it are allotted to. That's probably a question for finance and or planning on a larger level about CAC policy. So council can direct staff to do anything. At this time, we don't have a policy that directs us to do that with CACs. I see the city manager standing.
We're at 5 minutes, so thanks very much for that. We were kind of straying way outside this particular project, so although it was included in the appendix, I thought go ahead, but we're drifting into policy domain, so we're good. Councillor DeGenova, up to 5 minutes, please.
I do have some follow-up questions. I understand that the right supply includes not only non-market housing support, I suppose we could start with shelter rate housing, supportive housing, social housing, non-market housing, market housing, and there's some types of housing specifically in between family housing that are in our policies. Prescribing something outside of what is being recommended here by staff in this quasi-judicial body, could that impact the outcome of the project if council was to amend that, as Ms. Dunnett had said we could do, but would that possibly and potentially affect the project? Because we're not here to discuss policy, we're here to apply the policy to one specific project. I was just hoping for some confirmation there before we go through a process that I've seen happen before. Thanks.
Yan Zhang, Senior Rezoning Planner. I think the question is about whether that would affect the rezoning application
viability.
So I would say that the topic at hand tonight is about the rezoning application itself, and then the allocation of the CAC, which for this one will generate a target rate CAC. That's another discussion, and then the allocation of those CAC will be in accordance with council approved public benefit strategy or amended public benefit strategy, and will be subject to another discussion. It should be subject to another discussion.
Okay, and then I have another question for staff. I note that sometimes council will make small amendments and very carefully at public hearing, but I've also noted that has seemed to start to influence other projects that may have no more room in their pro forma, or it may make the project
So we can just
not
narrow it.
viable. So my question is that the applicant shares with you their pro forma, is that correct? And you work together to base any contributions off of that, and considering the provincial laws that govern that, is that correct?
Yes, so for this one, we have set target rate CAC. So that's already been pre-negotiated and determined. And so for this application, they will pay a predetermined CAC amount.
Thanks. I just thought I'd ask them beforehand.
Okay, thanks. I don't see anybody else on the list unless anybody else has questions. Okay, so we'll hear from the public. I just grab my little list here. And we have three folks who have signed up to speak, Josh Burrell, Carrie Murphy, and Clive Bottomley. So is Josh Burrell here? Please come up, and you have up to 5 minutes to speak, and you may have questions from council after. Please go ahead whenever you're comfortable.
Hi. Thank you for letting me speak here tonight. Obviously, I'm not from around here, so I'm not used to how this works. I'm a neighbor living off on 26th Avenue across the alley from behind this development of 620 to 644 West King Edward Avenue. And I'm against this, I'm not against property development in practice, but I'm against this rezoning really because of the direct impact on the neighbors such as myself. My concerns are sort of three in number. My first is risk of subsidence. I am unaware, and having talked to neighbors and builders, of whether redevelopers have any impetus to monitor, evaluate, and any responsibility for the shift to adjacent structures. And we're on the top of a hill, and the 620 West King Edward is further down the hill, so I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned, secondly, that there's been inadequate neighborhood engagement. This build will directly and negatively affect sightlines and daylight for my family and for neighbors. I appreciate Councillor Kirby-Young's comments about making things less dark earlier this evening. But when I consider my renovation work that I would do to my backyard, I actively pursue and I actively involve my neighbors and discuss what I'm planning to do with them, whereas it seems that the planning process here is very much passive. There are posters up and we have to seek out the developers and the city for discussion around this. And I actually have no idea as to the impact this build will actually have. The max height is not helpful. I've looked at the plans. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I have no idea the direct impact this is going to have. And I would ask that the architect be asked to provide 3D perspectives for the affected neighbors so that we can accurately assess the significant effect this will have, or the significant effect this build will have on us. And finally, I've got concerns about the risk of height creep. Something that I wasn't aware of is the risk of fifth floor amenity rooms that can get added at a later stage. And I would ask that the council try and ensure that this does not happen here, considering the negative impacts this will already have. So as a resident of the Cambie corridor, I'm sort of asking that the council ensure that planners are more active in providing information to neighbours rather than the passive process it is now. This is particularly of concern for people like me who live in the Cambie corridor, considering the ongoing redevelopments. And there is going to be a lot adjacent to 620 West King Avenue, which I'm sure will be redeveloped in future, where this is going to become an additional concern. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You have a question from Councillor DeGenova.
Thanks very much. I understand that this is a very transit-oriented neighborhood and area, and through the Cambie corridor planning process, it was very much it fell in line with a lot of other policies at the City of Vancouver. So, do you value the the increased density in the policies that brought this here, because I have to base this on whether or not this fits in the policy. I understand your concerns and the effect that it will have on you, and definitely I agree that our public consultation may need process. We're striving to increase that, and we'll do so through our citywide plan. My question for you is, do you think that transit-oriented development and increased density is important near transit?
Can I walk over to the plan?
I don't
Not on the
think.
floor of the council, no.
Yeah.
So if you look at the model over there.
Yes, I did
you
earlier.
can see that the square footage of the property that will be built includes roof terraces and patios. Does that help with having people live there? That adds cost to the build. People are going to have to pay more money there. So what you've actually done, I agree, redevelopment is important, it needs to be done, but the developer is going to get paid a premium for giving something to something else, taking that away from myself and my neighbors and we get no benefit from that. So I absolutely agree redevelopment needs to happen, but why should they get something for free at the cost of other people?
Well, I can't debate policy with you, although I did mention that when the policy came forward at council on green roofs and the maintenance and the expense of that. But I am wondering, just on the transit question I'd asked you specifically, the increased housing and density, specifically on the Cambie corridor near transit. Is that something that you support in general if it wasn't
I support
next to your
looking
home?
after the community in general in many ways, and including increasing density and providing accommodation for everybody who needs it, and that goes without saying. But at the same time, I need to look after
I understand.
my community as well.
Is there anything specifically that could be changed? Like if the green roof was changed, would that? I can't change that. I'm just trying to understand. Is it the size and scope of the development? Sorry.
My apologies to interrupt. What I'm asking is that there is no height creep with this, and that the building team keep a close eye on that. I'm asking that there is no creep to add a fifth floor amenity room as well, please. Those are the two main things I'm asking.
And I noted that you had some concerns specifically around the engineering components and the grade that this project is on. Is that correct? And if so, I'll ask our staff about that.
I am not an expert in that area by any stretch of the imagination. That is way outside my area of expertise. But again, this is something I've brought up to builders in other areas who have said that this is something that can be a concern, and there's not a lot I can do about it as an individual. So that is a concern of mine.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. And there's no other questions. Thanks for coming in this evening. Carrie Murphy. Great. Thanks for coming in. Up to 5 minutes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Murphy. I live on the 500 block of West 26th Avenue. I support this rezoning as it is currently described and presented. This rezoning is not the reason I came to the public hearing this evening. However, it was useful to review this one, too, and compare it to the one on the next agenda item. So I'd like to speak to it just briefly. This is a 4-story, is it that one over there? This is a 4-story building on West King Edward, and that is the height limit for the Cambie Corridor plan for King Edward. It is also a typical height for a 4-story building. It measures 45.8 feet according to the council reports. Perfect. However, I do want to note that I see in the design conditions contained in the policy report that the applicant is being encouraged to add an enclosed rooftop amenity room, which I would not support. Up to this point, the applicant has clearly decided not to go that route. As we will see when the next agenda item is before us, an enclosed rooftop amenity room comes with added height and massing. There hasn't been public consultation on the notion of the enclosed amenity rooftop space. Yes, it appears in the Canby Corridor plan, but unfortunately it was just slipped in there at the time that the plan was reopened to approve the addition of townhouse zones, which was called Phase 3. I only became aware of the enclosed rooftop amenity space because of the rezoning in the next agenda item. But as this rezoning stands now, as a 4-story building at a typical 4-story height of 45.8 feet, it has my support. So as you can see, I am not being NIMBY. I say this because when I speak about the next agenda item, some people may think that I am NIMBY. That's not the case at all. I recognize the Canby Corridor Plan is in place, and I know firsthand the extensive consultation when the Phase 2 of the Canby Corridor was approved in May 2011. I'll be talking more about that in my next speech, so stay tuned.
Okay.
It's just one last paragraph.
Okay.
It's unfortunate that the Phase 3 community engagement didn't include consultation on the significant changes that were being made to the areas planned under Phase 2. It's impossible to know all of the changes that were made to the Phase 2 iteration when Phase 3 was approved last year. I am aware of a couple now because of the rezoning coming up in the next agenda item. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. And there's no questions, but we'll hear from you.
Thank you.
The next one. Thanks very much. We've got Clive Bottomley. Thanks for coming in. Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Clive Bottomley. I live in the 500 block of West 26th Avenue, less than a block away from this rezoning. I support this application as it currently stands. It's within the 4-story height limits as was approved in the Canby Corridor Phase 2. And it's at a very reasonable height of 45.8 feet. So the scale is in line with what it should be from that Canby Corridor process. I do want to note, though, again, that the design conditions contained in the report, the applicant is being encouraged to add an enclosed rooftop amenity room, which would add a de facto 5th floor. If that is pushed through and they're forced to do it, I would not be in support of it. But as it currently stands now, I am in support of this 4-story building. It's, I think, a big issue of public consultation, really. It's my main point, is that the 4th floor is fine. The 5th floor that they're basically saddling us with was not put to the public. There was no public consultation on that rooftop amenity space, which has no real limits on size other than having to be slightly set back from roof edges. So anyway, I just wanted to support this particular rezoning. I think it's important to do that when they come in under guidelines that have been put to the public, and not just oppose applications that contain items that the public has not been consulted on. So that's what I'm doing here. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. And there's no questions. Thank you for coming in. Nobody else on the list, so I'm going to call now. Does anybody else like to speak to this? Anybody from the audience like to speak to this application? I'm going to call a second time. Anybody else? One last time. Okay, thanks very much. So we're going to close the public comments. And does the applicant have any closing comments? Hello, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Wing Leung. I'm the architect making the application. I note that in the condition that, and some of the speakers refer to it, to encourage to provide the amenity room on the roof. Our preference is to not provide that, mainly because of the overheight. And to provide amenity on the roof, we will have to provide elevator access for disability access, plus we will have to provide 2 exits from there. So those are increased over height as well. So our preference is to not provide the amenity room on the roof. I'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. And so the staff have any closing comments?
We don't have any closing comments, but we're happy to answer questions.
Great. Does council have any questions for staff at this point? Councillor Weep.
With the requirements for amenity space per square footage, if the space is not on the roof, where would it be in the building? What would be the change to the framework?
They do have amenity space in the proposal. It's located at grade in the courtyard, contiguous indoor and outdoor amenity space already in the proposal.
And it meets our current standards for amenity space for the size, square footage of the building?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Don't see anybody else on the list, so I'll need somebody to move the motion. Thank you, Councillor Dejanova. Seconder, Councillor Bly. Thank you. Any debate on this? Councillor Swanson.
I have an amendment.
Okay. Okay, let's wait till we get the amendment up first so people can take a look. Okay, we're up on screen. All right, Councillor Dejanova.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand that community amenity contributions are very specific, and there are very specific policies as to how these voluntary contributions are negotiated, and they're done so with our staff, not by council on the floor of council. So for this reason, I would ask you to call this amendment out of order.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take just a brief pause, council, and talk to the clerk and city manager, and I'll come right back to you. Okay, Councillor Dejanova, on your motion to rule this out of order. So my understanding is that this Cambie Corridor plan was put together after years of consultation with the public, and part of that was an allocation of CACs. So part of the negotiations for the entire plan was to work with the community to say, we want a library here, we want community centers there, that type of thing. And then the CACs that are collected are allocated for those purposes. So to come at the end of the process and to switch that would really go against the kind of nature of the overall plan. So I would say, in fact, it wouldn't be good governance to do that. It would, especially in this forum without discussion, it would basically remove funding from other other projects that the community has agreed on. So I am going to rule this one out of order, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't revisit CAC allocations in future plans to better reflect, I think, a new council's desire to put in more affordable housing. So in this instance, this is out of order, but I do think, again, it could be a wider discussion of CAC distributions in community plans like this one. Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councillor Swanson? Okay, thank you. Councillor DeGenova?
I'll just speak to the main motion, and I think that you highlighted in your ruling some of the things that I'd planned to say, because I do appreciate that the first speaker we heard from had some concerns. I was going to ask staff the questions, but then when I looked through and saw that actually the project team and the architect on this project, that there's a thorough team on this project, and I'm sure that all of the engineering requirements that our staff require moving forward with a process such as this, to make sure that the concerns that the speaker mentioned to us would not be something that would be of issue or concern. It's one of the reasons we go through these processes. I'm sorry, Councillor Kirby-Yung. Mr. Mayor.
Please continue.
I'm just hearing some chatter in the council chamber. Okay. I think that it's really important that we do hear those concerns. If there is an issue after the project has moved forward and is built, and I think that it's certainly been described to us before, we're in a process right now where we're looking at the rezoning. The development permit process might be another process where that could better be addressed, and I feel that that's not something that we should be dealing with at the moment. We have to look at the overall project and if it should move forward, for the reason that the Cambie corridor, and I was quite impressed with the policy, the plan, especially looking at flat rate CACs throughout the Cambie corridor for some areas and some proposed developments, working with the community to find out what amenities they wanted and how we could get there instead of guessing what those amenities would be. I commend our staff for their work on that, and I feel that this project does fit the policy. It fits many policy pieces, and especially when it comes to transit-oriented development and density that I think is appropriate for the neighborhood. So for those reasons, I will be supporting the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Swanson. I have you back on the queue.
Yeah, I just want to say that when I saw this public benefits tracking, it was really disturbing. It's the first time I've seen it. When I look at it, it basically means that if you're earning under 50,000, you can't live in. You might as well put up a sign that says no one under 50,000 can live in the Cambie corridor. And I don't think that's right. I don't think it's consistent with an equity strategy. And I think we need to take measures ASAP to stop that from happening. And one of the things we could do would be to allocate some of the CACs to housing that's more low income. And I'm going to try and do that at some sort of form so it won't get ruled out of order.
Okay. Look forward to that, Councillor Swanson. Thanks for your comments. I don't see anybody else on the queue. I guess I'll call the vote on this now. Councillor Kirby-Yung? Great. That has passed with Councillor Swanson in opposition. Thank you, Council. We're on to rezoning number 4 on West King Edward Avenue.
This is an application by RWA Architecture to rezone 582-588 West King Edward Avenue from RS1 District to CD1 District to permit the development of a 4.5-story residential building with 36 strata-titled units, including townhouses at the lane. A building height of 18.6 meters and a floor space ratio of 1.96 are proposed. Council has, since being referred to public hearing, Council has received 2 pieces of correspondence in opposition to the application. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have Scott Erdman here to give us a presentation. If Council would would like that. Is everybody okay with waiving the presentation? Okay, we're good. Thanks very much. You're all right with that? Okay, thank you. So is the applicant team here to speak to the application? Yes, would you like to speak to it or just take questions? Okay, you would. Thanks very much.
It's fancy. Hi, my name's Luke Ramsey. I'm with Aragon Properties, the landowner and developer of the property. I just wanted to say, maybe address some of the comments that we're going to hear that were in preamble in the last application. I just like to say, we're really excited about this project, and we've been working with staff from very early on to incorporate some of the features of the Phase 3 of the Cambie Corridor Plan, which include a rooftop amenity room. And some of the reasons why we did the rooftop amenity room was, as a builder with 30 years of experience here in Vancouver, we're always, as the city becomes more densified, we're always looking for ways for people who no longer have the opportunity to live in a single-family home or a traditional suburban setting to live in a type of home that feels more like a single-family home, is more spacious, and they can engage with their community. But is in an apartment building, for an example, a 4-story or a townhouse. And what having a rooftop amenity room allows people to do is to gather and share space and interact with their neighbors instead of having it exclusively as a rooftop deck for individual owners. And having the elevator up to the roof provides handicap access, provides light, and provides a community garden up there. The sunlight is from the south, obviously, and so the shadows that are impacted by this additional height shine onto King Edward Street, not onto the neighbor's side behind our property. And so for this and a number of other reasons, we chose to include it as a strong benefit to the project. I just hope that you consider that as you listen to the people who are speaking in opposition to the height. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so any questions from staff to the, from council to the staff or the applicant? Remember, this is your only chance to ask the applicant questions. Councillor Kirby-Yung.
So I can ask the applicant? Is that
You can, yeah, please address the applicant.
Yeah, if I might follow up just on the amenity, because it's a really key question in terms around livability and access to the outdoors. So could you describe for me a bit more, you said you're excited about the amenity room, what that would look like and how that would be laid out, trying to visualize.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you refer to page, plans are in here. Don't actually know if they're included in the council report. Scott, do we have a slide of that? A slide of the rooftop amenity layout? No. So essentially, it has an elevator pop-up and an accessible washroom. And then beside that, there is a lounge flex area with a kitchen for residents to use, like a communal kitchen. And then it walks out to a south-facing rooftop garden. And then there's a through room to a view on the north side, where we're looking at options of including things like a play area or a little bit of space. And then the roof itself is set back from the edge of the building. So the rooftop amenity is centralized, as you can see in the model there. And then it's set back from the edge of the building, and then there's an extensive green roof that surrounds it.
So it would have a lot of natural light, is that right? And then access to the outside doors could be open.
That's the
Fresh
idea.
air.
There's doors on both sides. Obviously, you have the light from one side, which is a benefit, and then you have the views of the mountains on the other side. So we try to give access to both sides.
Okay, and is it your view typically that kind of amenity space versus sometimes you see them in strata type buildings and they tend to be dark or buried, that it would encourage more use of some of those of amenity space like that?
Yeah, I mean, trying to encourage people who are living in the same building to engage with each other and live in the same space is always going to be a benefit. We're actually doing a building directly kitty corner to this one, and it's just finishing up now, and we've just We're about 75% sold. So one of the things that we do is we generally sell from finished. And what that means is that people who are buying there are going to live there. So we try and put a lot of effort into things that are going to make people who are going to live there really appreciate it, rather than catering to an investor type market.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions to staff or the applicant? No, we'll move to the public portion of the hearing. And we have Alan Bume. Sorry about that. Thank you for coming in, sir, and up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Riley Park South Cambie Community Visions Group. And the developer extended an invitation to view the preliminary plans in September of last year. And we appreciated the courtesy at that time. And we still do, of course. Since then, we've seen the project evolve into a building with rather excessive height for this zoning within Phase 3 of the corridor. And there's obviously excessive, what we'll call wiggle room for heights in the corridor in the Phase 3 document. What we have here is a project that stretches the Phase 3 section on building heights, which is section 5.1.1, and it's pages 127, 128. You probably have that. This clause, we felt, was put into the document without adequate public consultation. What we have are a few sentences within a 200-page document that was not seen by RPSC during the consultative process. And you received a copy of our letter dated May 13th, 2019, that expresses our concerns. And I do have a copy here. The more one ponders this section of the document, she or he must ask for the rationale for its inclusion. That is, this outdoor space, the amenity on the roof. Was it to create a stronger community within the building? And RPSC sees a more important objective than this section, and that is to invite the new residents to be involved in a community amenities that their CACs have paid for. We don't need the creation of silos, but rather a neighborhood where the residents interact with each other. And that means outside of the building and into the various community amenities that we have and we hope to see more of as the population increases. This project is situated on a land that slopes approximately 11 to 12 feet from its highest to its lowest point, and we said in our letter that more effort should be made to clearly explain how heights are calculated, especially when the lots are on a slope. And this one has an approximate 11.5-foot difference. And this is not the first project that RPSC has been involved with, and where we see there's a real conflict in height interpretation. And you get terms like lowest average grade, main floor height, or similar phrasing. And the layperson doesn't understand it, the engineers understand it, and obviously the architects do. So in the policy report that was distributed, so it's September 17th of 2019, Appendix B has a few sections just to bring to your attention. Sections 1 to 3, I think, need to be noted there. They talk about urban design. So in first item, the building height to be more consistent with other four-story buildings in the surrounding area, it states. And this can be achieved by providing 10-story heights for the residential floor space. Now, positive, change, but the wording is not strong enough. It should be mandatory or it should have must in it, and then it may be acceptable. The second point, actual and perceived height and massing of the rooftop common amenity room to minimize its appearance as views from the street level. Sure, but what about how it's viewed from the neighbors to the south? Maybe 26, and it goes uphill, so it would be even a block further than that or more. The third point, it provides a the corridor provides a minimum of 400 square feet for an amenity room. But what's the maximum size? Another item, Appendix B, Engineering Services, page 11 in there, item 3D, talks about future street improvements to accommodate future protected bike lanes, and yeah, it should receive more attention. The question here is, where is the mention of a comprehensive traffic plan with the number of motor vehicles that has not been mentioned, not in this project alone, but throughout the Cambie corridor, and especially in this block? All you needed to go west and south, and you'll see it. So that's a concern that we have as well.
And just 15 seconds left.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's see. Okay, a couple of other things to mention here is there's a comment on reinforcement to scale and character of the lane. Well, I would suggest, and the urban design panel said that, would suggest that if you've not seen the back lanes throughout the Cambie corridor, take a walk and have a look. They are certainly not friendly. And
Okay,
some
thanks.
of them have been complete. Sorry.
And that's the 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and I don't see any questions on the list for you. Thank you for coming in this evening. We have John Benetti. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Benetti, and you have up to 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and I'll stay within my 5 minutes. I am generally supportive of densification in and around transit, and I certainly was supportive of up till Phase 3. In particular, I'm not, or I take exception to the specific proposal here. My family has lived in the area, actually in the area right across the back lane on 581 West 26th for some 41 years. So we know the area pretty well. We intend to continue to be residents in, ultimately we expect stacked townhomes once redevelopment occurs as time goes on. And so we have a stake in livability and specifically the adjacent properties and how they fit in. Cambie Corridor Plan was a carefully developed document. It comprised something like 261 pages by way of a PDF, and it detailed designs, and it provided cross-sectional views at various street locations, and it speaks specifically of sensitive density and height transitions. Ultimately, it caters for 6 stories up to 2 properties away from Cambie Street, and then 4 stories thereafter. 4 stories are in the order of 44 feet of elevation. Now, planning did note, or did not raise the, the current development has a 5th story in all but name. Discussion at the open house occurred. A number of parties registered a complaint against that 5th story. This was communicated to planning, who intimated that in subsequent hearings this would be raised. And in particular, it wasn't raised at the urban design panel. And here we are at this late juncture with an architectural design in hand, and it's a 5th story. Now, the proponent says, oh, we have to accommodate building mechanical, HVAC, some mechanical associated with the elevator. Well, in fact, elevator access, 2 stairway accesses, and so on and so forth. They could have put that, the amenities portion, which will be a common room, possibly an exercise room. Obviously, we've heard of a common kitchen. They could have included that within the 4-story envelope. They did not. Further, they've provided for a single pitch roof, and the elevation is 61 feet, not 44 feet, 61 feet. So it doesn't meet the spirit embodied in Phase 2. In Phase 3, without public consultation, it spoke about the ability to have amenity space on the 5th floor. No public consultation. So I feel kind of abandoned by planning in terms of kind of bringing this forward earlier on, much earlier on than what we are here now in front of with the proposal in hand. So I feel betrayed, And 600 block West King Edward, which we heard previously, espoused fitting in properly to the neighborhood. And they eschewed the notion of a fifth floor. Why can't this architect do this for this proposal? Thank you.
Thanks very much. You have a question from Councillor Fry. Please go ahead, Councillor Fry.
Yes. Sorry. Thanks, Mayor. Sir, I'm just a little clarity. So, because I'm reading in the report and it says that the urban design panel reviewed this and actually were quite pleased with the fifth floor in January 2019. Are you
Yes,
saying?
I'm speaking of that specifically, but where did the planner actually bring this up that there was some opposition? It
Just
wasn't
direct
brought
your-
up.
Well,
Sir, if you could direct your comments forward, that'd be great.
So your fundamental issues with the consultation process and
Well, the consultation process dually. Number one, going from phase 2 to phase 3, where fifth floor amenity space wasn't spoken to and wasn't vetted by the public, and then also the extremely late timing in bringing the opposition or the concerns around fifth story and fitting in to the process of planning.
But it's saying here that it went to UDP almost a year ago.
Yeah. They were pleased as punch with this. Indeed, but where was the comment in that? My colleague or my fellow neighbor attended the meeting. It wasn't brought up at all. It's not documented, but it was not brought up.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your time. That's it for questions. Let's see, Carrie Murphy. Thanks very much for coming back and staying. You have up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
For hearing me out. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Carrie Murphy. I live at 547 West 26th Avenue, just a couple of houses east and across the lane from this rezoning. I do not support this rezoning because it doesn't fall under the 4-story limit. There was no consultation of the addition of the enclosed roof space, rooftop amenity, and it is only because of this rezoning that I found out about it. This building is not the height of a typical 4-story building. It's seeking approval at 61 feet, which is in fact just 2 feet shy of a 6-story building that's at the other end of the block. The new rooftop amenity creates a de facto 5th story, and in this case, this 5th story is extremely tall and significant massing because of its design. And finally, I don't support this rezoning because adding more height like this exacerbates the wall that is being built around me and my neighbors, cutting us off from seeing anything interesting in the distance. I'd like to talk about the history of how we have 4-story limit on West King Edward. In the early stages of the Canby-Gorder planning in 2010, the planners promoted 6 stories on King Edward. The neighborhood for blocks around came out and forced to oppose the height in the area. The Riley Park South Canby Community Vision that had just been approved 5 years earlier showed that 3-story townhouses was the supported built form on King Edward, and that is what the people wanted, 3 stories only. Many people gave hours of work to work on this extensive RPSC community vision, and they wanted their vision respected. There was an email and letter writing campaign. There was extremely well-attended walkabout and workshop on June 26, 2010. I have all this information in my Canby-Gorder file. I was very involved. 200 people from the neighborhood came out on a Saturday afternoon for 4 hours to walk and chat with planners and to work alongside them at a workshop. The workshop was crowded, and people had to stand around the various breakout tables because there was not enough chairs for everyone. The turnout was far greater than the planners had anticipated. There was about 4 times as many people as there were handouts. I invited councillors to come to the area for walkabouts with me and other residents, and in total 4 different councillors came over the course of a few months. A petition was created by another resident in the area, and I still have a copy of it, and there's easily 6 pages of signatures, and this petition was designed to reduce the height from 6 stories. And that is what happened. Because of the outpouring of non-support for the 6-story plan for King Edward, planning and listened and reduced it from 6 to 4. All that community effort paid off because 4 stories was better than 6 and closer to the RPSC vision of 3. The new rooftop amenity space was approved at the time of the Canby Corridor Phase 3 approval last year, May 2018. The problem is that was never any consultation on that. And I have a file of all kinds of things for Phase 3. There's a Phase 3 Spring Expo. It's got lots of information. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? There's nothing about what do you think about a rooftop amenity on King Edward on the 4th story. Creating a 5th story. Phase 3 focused on townhome development in a single-family area. Never ever was there any mention of changes being made to Phase 2 sites. I attended every Canby Corridor planning event, whether it was walkabouts, workshops, self-guided tours, open houses, coffee chats, surveys, you name it, I attended it. I can't believe that in 3 years of planning for Phase 3 townhouses, that it was never ever mentioned that changes were also being made that would enable a de facto 5th story in the 4-story limit area. I want to talk a bit about not receiving notifications of open houses and public hearings. I know for 2019 I haven't received anything, so there is something wrong with the notification process. It's broken. So if you think that residents are getting their chance to be consulted, I don't think that's a good assumption. I know I'm not the only one getting them. Some of my neighbors aren't getting them either. I pay close attention to my mail. In fact, I have notifications here going back 2016, 2017. I keep this stuff. It doesn't end up in the recycling. So I am paying attention to what's happening, and I'm not getting these notices. So if I'm not getting them, we know other people aren't either. I have talked to planners about this, and they said they get back to me, but nobody has.
We're just at 10 seconds.
Okay, and so what the notices say is also misrepresenting, because for the longest time this was described in these notices as 4 stories, and then for the public hearing notice 2 weeks before the public hearing, it's now described as 4.5, which is getting closer to the truth, but not the truth.
Okay, thanks for coming in. There's no questions from you from council. I really appreciate your time this evening. And finally, Clive Bottomley. Thanks for staying. Please
Good
go
evening,
ahead.
Mayor and Council. My name is Clive Bottomley. Our neighborhood will be negatively impacted by this rezoning as it's currently proposed, so we do not support it. As I said before, I live at 547 West 26th Avenue, which is across the lane from this development on King Edward. The RPSC vision that was adopted by Council in November 2005 documented a maximum of 3-story townhouses. This vision was then kind of ripped up very soon afterwards, even though it was supposed to inform decisions for 20 years. So that's the first time the goalpost got moved for us. And then the second time the city has moved the goalpost, it's sort of like they're doing it in the middle of the game. There was no consultation whatsoever on these 5th floor amenity rooms. So I don't know how that has even been able to be put in there. We're not against multifamily. We're not against more density in the area. We'd be happy to see 3-story multifamily townhouses go in. We're even happy with the 4-story condos going in at a reasonable 4-story height. But we don't want to see the scale out of whack to what is going to be going in behind it. There's 3-story townhouses going to be going in behind it, but with the slope of the land, those 3-story townhouses could have roof decks that could look over a 4-story roof deck for one of these condos. But if you add a 5th floor and add a very large 5th floor, like is being asked for here, at 61 feet, now the scale is out of whack. So we're not opposed to 4-story condos. We're opposed to this particular 5-story and almost 6-story condo that's being asked for here. At 61 feet, it is only 2 feet less than a 6-story building that's right across the lane from us. So, I mean, we can go into all the background about the public consultation and all the hard work that people have done during that consultation process. And the heights now not really being respected. So that's our major issue with it, and the fact that there was no public consultation on this 5th floor. It's a long process, and over 3 years, we never heard anything about this 25% increase in height. So what it amounts to is a 25% increase in height, and that's if you do it at a normal 10-foot or so story. This one, the top story, is hard to tell exactly how much it's going to be from the drawings on the website because they conflict with one another, but they're looking to be in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 feet tall at the peak of the roof. So it's a massive top floor, and the width of it is also more than 60% of the total frontage of the building. So when we talked to planners, it was supposed to be a modest rooftop amenity space. And 60% width of the building at a massive 18 to 20 feet high is not a modest structure on top of the roof. So what they're particularly asking for, I think, goes far beyond what they should be asking for, even if you allow the 5th floor that had no public consultation. The floor, the 5th floor, is also not just amenity space. So while they try to say this is good for the building as a whole, it actually encompasses private space on the width of that amenity room. There are 2 access points up to private roof decks for private suites. And those private spaces that are enclosed by this rooftop structure add 20% to the width of that structure. So although I do note that there is some kind of design condition being put on that, it's only merely a suggestion. Nobody's saying they're going to have to actually do away with that extra 20% of building width. Other developments that are asking for these 5th floor amenity rooms are asking for reasonable heights on that 5th floor, and they're asking for 25 to 30% of the width of the building, not over 60% of the width of the building. So this is where, we feel like this development is taking advantage of this new rule to the detriment of the surrounding neighborhood.
We're just at the 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll go to my final paragraph then. In closing, I want to reiterate that we are supportive of multifamily housing in the area, and as such, I came and spoke in favor of a 4-story building tonight. The application that I'm here speaking on now, though, is an incredibly tall building with too much massing, and will negatively impact the scale. The scale of this will negatively impact the neighborhood, and so for that reason, we do not support it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You got a question from Councillor Fry? Please go ahead, Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I'm struggling to keep up here. I'm looking up the Cambie phase plans and stuff like that. As I look at this, and I hear reference to phase 3, isn't this phase 2?
This is this building was put in place under phase 2, but during phase 3 there are minor changes made to the phase 2 guidelines, and this is why we now have a 5th floor on this application and some other applications. It was quietly slipped in without any public consultation. The phase 3 was supposed to be just about the townhomes that would be going behind these buildings, and about Oak Ridge. So during that exhaustive work, 3 years of planning for staff, there was never any mention of these changes to the phase 2 buildings on King Edward and these 5th floor amenity rooms. I went to every meeting, and there was never any mention. I've never seen any literature on this, and if staff can point me to somewhere where I've missed it, great, but I'd like to see some proof that there was ever any public consultation on these 5th floor amenity rooms.
And I can appreciate the frustration around the public consultation process. I mean, as I look at it on a map, it's a block from the SkyTrain station, and it seems like an appropriate level of height prescription for that location, given transit-oriented density, that kind of thing. So I'm struggling a little bit with, and I'm trying to catch up with the various iterations of the plan as I go through, and I hear some of your concerns. But yeah, okay, thanks.
I mean, we're all for density, and you're right, it is very near a train station, and that's where density should be. But what we're talking about is this moving of goalposts, where if you're going to give them an extra floor, then maybe you should give an extra floor to things behind, and so then the scale won't be out of whack. I mean, you want to have rules that are in place for everybody, developers and residents alike. So if a developer bought